Please, Sue. Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the July 16th meeting of the Milford Planning and Zoning Board. If we could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. Sue, if you would, please call the roll.
Mr. Agnesi?
Present.
Mr. Alling?
Present.
Mr. Anderson?
Present.
Mr. Hirsch? Mr. Collegian?
Present.
Mr. Macchio?
Present.
Mr. Mortimer?
Present.
Mr. Sadi?
Present.
Mr. Zahardis?
Present.
Chairman Quish?
I'm here as well, and Mr. Hirsch indicated that he would be a little bit late tonight. First order of business is 1719 Cherry Street, Zone RO, petition of Andrea Gomez Esquire for a site plan review to construct an 8-unit residential development under State Statute 8-30G on map 65, block 817, parcel 11, of which Cherry Pie LLC is the owner. Applicant has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, board members. My name is Andrea Gomes. I'm an attorney at Hinckley Allen in Hartford, here tonight on behalf of the applicant. With me tonight, just behind me to my left, are Jeff Gordon and Robert Wee-Way from Codis Bodie and Associates, our consulting landscape architect and civil engineer. Sam Gardner, our consulting architect from Greg Weiss and Gardner Architects LLC, and Steve Ullman, our consulting traffic engineer as well from Alfred Benesch and Company. We are, as you said, Mr. Chairman, here tonight for the site plan review for the redevelopment of 17-19 Cherry Street from 2 units to 8 units in one building. We have proposed this application under General Statutes 8-30G, Connecticut's Affordable Housing Land Use Appeals Act, with 3 of the 8 units to be preserved for moderate income households. Before we dive into the substance of the presentation, I did want to touch on a few procedural housekeeping matters. The notice was properly published in the paper, and a thank you to staff for coordinating that. In terms of timing, just so the Commission is aware, the application was filed on March 28th, and it was received on April 16th. The review was then delayed as Mr. Sulkus inquired about the applicant's right to use the existing shared driveway located immediately east to the site. The Commission can see it here to the left of the rendering, as well as whether the application needed to be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission. We answered both of those questions posed by Mr. Sulkus in 2 memos that we submitted into the record in May of this year, essentially confirming that the property does have legal access to support the proposed redevelopment along that shared driveway, and also that historic application was not appropriate at this time. I will note that this afternoon, Ms. LaFawn did send a letter that was issued by Attorney Suchins addressing the Historic Preservation Commission issue. While Attorney Suchins disagrees with our analysis that essentially historic preservation review is not appropriate, she does not say that the Commission cannot act tonight. She essentially says that the certificate of appropriateness will be necessary before a demolition permit is issued. Again, we respectfully disagree with that for the reasons issued or outlined in our memo, but the important thing for the Commission's knowledge here is that it does not prevent the Commission from acting tonight. So having received those two memos in May and having presumably concluded that they were satisfactory, Mr. Sulkus then circulated the application for staff review in early June. As of today, we understand that the traffic review has not been completed, but Mr. Ullman has been in contact with the police department regarding at least some preliminary comments that we received. We did receive comments from the city engineer, Mr. Podleski, on June 26th, which we did address in our supplemental materials with some minor plan revisions that we'll be going through tonight during our presentation. That does take me to our supplemental materials that we submitted on July 11th. The commission should have that tabbed package. I'll note first that the majority of the materials that the commission had in this package were items that were already in the record, but what we did was essentially compile those materials into one convenient package, essentially for the commission's convenience and reference during the public hearing. The package includes, and I'll just go through them quickly because it is important to note some of the related approvals that we did receive for this development. At tab 1, you have the April 2024 Sewer Commission approval for the proposed redevelopment. You have the May 2024 memos that I just mentioned regarding historic district application and use of the shared driveway at tabs 2 and 3. At tab 4, you have the fire marshal's review and approval subject to conditions, which the applicant accepts. The June 10th letter from the Wetlands Commission staff is also in the package, confirming that no wetlands permit would be necessary for the proposed redevelopment on this site. Mr. Podleski's comments, the June 25th comments, and our July 10th responses, they're fairly short, are at tabs 6 and 9 respectively. And then at tab 7, you have our March 2024 architectural plan set. Again, we'll be going through these materials in detail, just highlighting them for the commission. At tab 8, the commission does have our July letter from Mr. Ullman responding to Mr. Thompson's peer review on traffic. As the commission may recall, the letter essentially requested more information, which Mr. Ullman provided and will be explaining in a few minutes. And last but not least, submitted together with this package, but not bound in it separately, we did submit a revised plan set to the commission. The plan set incorporated minor revisions that were responsive to Mr. Podleski's comments that we received, but again, we will touch on that. One final note on the housekeeping side of things, and we did have a little bit of discussion before the hearing opened regarding what kind of application this is. So we filed this as a site plan application. Mr. Sulkus initially wanted to call it a special permit. We again clarified that this is a site plan application, which is appropriate under 830G. Because Mr. Sulkus explained that site plans generally do not get public hearings, my colleague, Attorney Hollister, engaged in a discussion with Mr. Sulkus, pointing out that the board certainly has the discretion with site plans, this application as well as any other site plan, as to whether to hold a public hearing and receive public comments. It did so for Shell Avenue, a similar application with a small multifamily development. So we agreed, at least informally with Mr. Sulkus, that a public hearing can and should be heard for this application. So with that brief background, I'll get into the substance of the application. I'll ask Mr. Harris to go to the second slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so the property is just under...
Excuse me, Counsel. Excuse
Yes.
me, Mr. Chair, if I can ask a question. If you're agreeing this is going to be a public hearing, do we not have to notice this and continue this particular matter because it's not docketed as a public hearing?
Board Member Sadi, it was properly noticed in the paper at the proper statutory intervals as a public hearing on the site plan application. I'm not speaking for staff, but Ms. LaFawn confirmed that before the hearing opened, and certainly she can weigh in on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Believe us, we want notice to be correct. Okay, so as the commission can see here, we have a PowerPoint. The commission should have hard copies as well if it wanted to reference that as we discuss. The property is just under a quarter of an acre, and it's located in the RO, or residential office zone. The site is walkable to the Milford train station, which the commission can see in the lower left-hand corner of the slide that's up on the screen. It's about a third of a mile when I ran it through GIS. Two public bus stops are also located just east of the site on Cherry Street, and one additional stop is located, actually, Mr. Harris, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. This is just a zoomed-in aerial, and the commission can see the two bus stops to the east of the site along Cherry Street, and then we have one more bus stop there to the left or to the west of the site at the intersection of River and Prospect Street. The site as it exists today has a two-family building, a two-family dwelling that was built in about 1920. Site access is via that shared driveway that I mentioned earlier in my presentation, which is shared with the abutting building the commission can see here on the rendering, the brick building located to the left of the page, which is to the east. It's a four-family development. Next slide, please. So Cherry Pie is now seeking to, and this is a photo of the existing conditions of the site. Cherry Pie is now seeking to redevelop the property into a new multifamily community with 8 units. Next slide, please. Thank you. And this is a rendering that Mr. Gardner put together. He'll be touching on this during his presentation as well. So the redevelopment will be one building, 8 units, which consists of 4 one-bedroom units ranging from about 696 feet to 839 square feet, and 4 two-bedroom units ranging from about 954 square feet to 1,183 square feet. There will be 3 residential floors, but part of the first floor at the rear of the building will have covered parking, and we will continue to use the shared driveway. There are 12 parking spaces proposed here. We have essentially 8 surface spaces with 4 auto stacker parking lifts above 4 of those spaces. The 4 spaces that have the auto stacker lifts above that will be reserved for the 2-bedroom units. But again, we'll touch on this. I'm just giving the commission a little bit more of an overview. The building will have an elevator, and there will be a roof deck at the rear of the building. New sidewalks are proposed along Cherry Street, and we will be maintaining existing utilities through the Regional Water Authority and United Illuminating. So the application that we initially submitted in March, I believe, has also contained an affordable housing needs memorandum. It's a separately tabbed package documenting the local, regional, and national need for affordable rental housing. Milford specifically certainly has made progress, but 5.2% of its housing units counted by DOH are deed restricted or subsidized. So 44% of renters in Milford are cost burdened, meaning that they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. The affordable units that we have here on site, we've proposed 3. They will be interspersed throughout the building, and although we haven't specifically designated them. And the qualifying income range here is for households earning approximately $53,000 to $86,000 for those affordable units. As I mentioned, the application was filed under General Statutes 830G, which means that the board here can only deny if the application receives evidence that the site plan will cause a substantial public health and safety issue that outweighs the need for affordable housing and which cannot be addressed by reasonable changes to the plan. And non-compliance with the underlying zoning regulations is not a valid basis for denial. So with that overview, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to hand it over to the rest of my team. I will certainly conclude at the end, but we'll get a little bit more into the details. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, staff, commissioners. My name is Jeffrey Gordon. I am a principal with Codispoti and Associates, doing business at 263 Boston Post Road in the town of Orange. I'm a site planner and a licensed landscape architect here in the state of Connecticut, and we were working for Cherry Pie on this site. And what we wanted just to share, Attorney Gomes really made a very nice presentation and covered much of the bases on this, but I will address some of the comments that the town engineer had made, and just to see how that works out. But the staff, again, we did get comments from the fire marshal, and those are acceptable about the aspect of this building, which the architect will go into more detail. It's a sprinklered building, and it will have a fire department connection and a hydrant added to support that. So certainly that is an additional safety feature that will be beneficial to the development. Also, we have the layout, and going to Mr. Podluski's comment, he did ask questions about the viability of parking spaces under the building and to the side. The parking spaces that we show from the rear of the parking spaces across the travelway is 27 feet, which is well in excess of our parking lot standard in the city of Milford, which would be 24 feet in a parking lot. The 3 spaces that are situated under the rear of the building have a clearance of almost 11 and a half feet, I think 11 feet 3 inches. So the accessible parking space is located there under cover. The area would also benefit from the sprinkler system of the building, and any kind of a van, high-top van and whatnot would certainly fit there as well. The use of the stackers are very, very customary in both residential and commercial components. We can get into more detail on that as we go forward. For other features of the site that are more energy efficient, we've used use of native plants. We have LED lighting, a snow shelf for snow removal that would be able to be incorporated. We can incorporate a bicycle rack, and we can also, with the flat roof of the building, we could continue to analyze the viability of solar panel element on the roof, just to make sure that we have green components. One of the other comments that came from Mr. Podluski was on the landscaping plan. Perhaps we could just go forward a little bit. Okay, not that far, okay. I think we're going the wrong way. Back up, nope. Back, you gotta go back the other way. Right there, okay. Oh, you don't have the landscape? On the landscaping plan on sheet SB4, we do have a fairly extensive planting, use of native plant materials, but the one question, the concern was that the maintenance of the plant materials along the street frontage would have to be pruned in such a way as to always maintain a good sight line coming out of the driveway. The lighting plan, again, we're using LED lighting, and we would comply with your lighting regulations. And I think that is all I have at this point, but if you have no questions, we could turn to Mr. Weiwei.
I think you continue with your presentation unless anyone wants to address questions now. We can wait till the end for questions if you'd like.
Slide 6, Stephen. 6. Good evening. My name is Robert Weiwei. I'm a professional engineer licensed in the state of Connecticut and principal with the firm of Codispoti & Associates with offices at 263 Boston Post Road in Orange, Connecticut. Based upon the stormwater management plan, what we're looking at is basically an existing site right now that has approximately 61% of impervious surface coverage consisting of the existing building, asphalt parking, and sidewalk area. The site and the topography is essentially flat with a small portion or the ridge line running across the front range line of the building, with that portion of the site sloping or pitching back towards Cherry Street, and the remainder of the property pitching to the rear of the property towards the cemetery. There is no formal drainage collection system on site as it presently exists today. Runoff is primarily through sheet flow and shallow concentrated flow over the parking and lawn areas in the back portion of the area. There's approximately 1,250 square feet of shared driveway access between the two properties, our property and the property to the east of us. And for the purposes of our analysis, we have included that in our calculations because that portion of the driveway does kind of flow onto our property. So we did take that into account when analyzing the pre and post conditions for the runoff. Soils have been identified on the property as Haven Urban Land Complex, which have a hydrologic soil group B soils and provide for a high hydraulic conductivity rate. We've also performed soil testing on site. Mr. Polutsky was present for that testing, and that testing did basically confirm what the NRCS was pointing out. The soils are fairly sandy throughout the soil profile. With respect to groundwater, the deep mapping has identified the groundwater classification as GB for this particular site and area. And what that basically means is that the groundwater is classified as unsuitable for human consumption without treatment of the water. With respect to the floodplain, the site is located within FEMA Zone X with areas, which represents areas of minimal flood hazard area associated with it. And I don't think the slide is on the sheet, but our sheet SB2 is the grading plan, and if we take a look at that, you could see that the building, parking, sidewalks, and other ancillary features will take up approximately 81% of impervious area. And what that represents is that there will be an increase in runoff expected as a result of the proposed development unless it's properly mitigated as part of the plan. And we have put together a stormwater management plan which provides for a number of measures to mitigate any of the increases in runoff, including water quality enhancements, detention, and infiltration, which are all consistent with the 2004 Stormwater Quality Manual by the state of Connecticut. With regards to the stormwater, all the roof areas and pavement areas within the tributary area will be collected and discharged to a proposed water quality structure, which in essence is a hydrodynamic separator. And based upon the calculations provided by the manufacturer, that will be capable of removing approximately 91% of the total suspended solids expected in the runoff. From the water quality control structure, flow will be directed to an underground gallery system, which for this particular project consists of 15 units of 4 foot wide by 8 foot long by 4 foot high concrete galleries, which will have a combined storage capacity of approximately 2,000 cubic feet. The galleries will contain 100% of the calculated water quality volume for the project, which is estimated at 660 cubic feet. So you can see there's a big difference between the 660 and the 2,000. So what is happening with the extra capacity in there, that is basically being utilized as detention storage and will provide for the reduction in peak rates of runoff as well as volumes of runoff from the proposed development. With that system being in place, a zero increase in both peak rates of runoff and runoff volumes will be provided for all storms that were analyzed with our study. And that basically consisted of everything from the water quality event going up to the 100-year storm. Based upon our analysis, it's my professional opinion that the proposed stormwater management system will not have any negative impacts to the site or to adjacent properties as long as the system is properly installed and maintained. And we're looking at the sheet SP3, which is a soil erosion sediment control plan, which is comprised of mostly standard measures which will be implemented during construction, consisting of silt fencing along the north, west, and south property lines, and a fiber waterlog system that's going to be set up along the east property line in conjunction with the shared driveway with the property off to the east of the property. We also have topsoil stockpile area that's been provided in the southeast corner of the property. All major utilities will be provided to the site, consisting of water, sewer, gas, electric, and CATV. As was pointed out before, we do have 2 existing fire hydrants, one located on Cherry Street, approximately 415 feet away from the project area, as well as an additional hydrant out at the 5 corners located on Plymouth, which is in the ballpark of about 200 feet. In accordance with the fire marshal's recommendations, because we are sprinkling the building and there's going to be a hose connection to the building itself, they typically require that we install a hydrant within 100 feet of that in order to provide for service. And we will be providing that in our proposed plans. So with that, the proposed project as proposed will not negatively impact the health, safety, or welfare of the surrounding community as the development of this project. With that, that pretty much wraps up my presentation. We'll have Mr. Gardner come up Steve Ullman come up and address the traffic.
Thank you. I just have one question with regard to the square footage of the driveway. You had 1,260 square feet.
Well, that's additional offsite area, because normally when we do our drainage calculations, we would be looking at just the area on our property. But in this particular case, because this driveway is shared, okay, and the way that we provide the business area, portions of the asphalt that are on the adjacent property.
Right. I just want to know the calculation to get to the 1,260. How many lineal feet and how wide? Did you calculate the 1,260? What are the numbers that got you to 1,260?
Again, I'd have to go back. Those were all done in the computer system. So it was basically, starting from the front line of the building, heading back.
And those drawings are to scale, correct? I'm sorry, I can't hear unless you go into the mic.
The length of the property line is approximately 200 feet. So if we took the 200 feet off of that and take 20 feet off of here, because this drains to Cherry Street, and then take and divide that into the 1,260, that's going to give us, if you bear with me, it's going to be somewhere around 180 feet.
So 180 by what gets us to 1,260?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Steve Ullman. I'm a professional engineer in the state of Connecticut. I'm employed by Benesch Associates in Glastonbury, Connecticut, and I was retained to do a traffic evaluation for the site development in response to John Thompson's letter. As you know, this is located at 17 and 19 Cherry Street. It's located along the south side of Cherry Street, approximately 240 feet to the east of Prospect Street. The site is within walking distance of the Milford train station. Cherry Street is classified as an urban minor arterial beginning at Route 1 to the east, continuing past the site to the intersection of Prospect, Plymouth, and West Main. Between Route 1 and Gulf Street to the east, the posted speed limit along Cherry Street is 35 miles an hour. At Gulf Street, heading west, the posted speed limit becomes 25 miles an hour. Even though there's no signs out there, it's on the records as a 25-mile-an-hour speed zone. In the vicinity of this site, Cherry Street is approximately 35 feet wide. Right at the site and to the west, it widens to about 37, 38 feet to provide 2 lanes westbound approaching the intersection of Prospect and 1 lane eastbound. No parking is posted on the north side of Cherry Street. Don't see any signs out there. No record of no parking on the south side, but there is, in my site visit on Google Earth and the other engineer's site visit, there was no one parked along the south side of Cherry Street. There are sidewalks along both sides of Cherry Street from Locust Street to the east, all the way to the west to the intersection of Prospect and West Main. Sidewalks are provided along one or both sides of Prospect, River, Main, and Plymouth Street in the vicinity of the intersection. Sight lines from the site driveway along Cherry Street were measured according to methodology by the Connecticut DOT. That's from an eye height of 3.5 feet to an object height of 3.5 feet. Looking towards the west, towards Prospect Street and West Main, the site distance exceeds 280 feet through the intersection, which meets the site distance for 25 miles an hour. I should note that intersection is signalized. To the east, the available sight line exceeds 400 feet, which exceeds the minimum required sight distance for 390 feet, which would be good for 35 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour above the supposed speed limit. Crash data was obtained from the Yukon Crash Repository for the 5-year period, or 5.5-year period, from January 1st, 2019 to June 20th, 2024, for the roadways and intersections in the vicinity of the site. There were 17 crashes recorded along Cherry Street and the intersection of Cherry, Prospect River, and West Main, approximately 350 feet within distance of the site. Of the 17 crashes, 13 had no apparent injury, 3 was possible, 1 with suspected minor injury, no majors or fatalities. The types of crashes were rear-end type crashes, 10 of them, 2-angle, and 5 crashes that were not identified. The 10 rear ends are what would be expected at a signalized intersection. Signalized intersections tend to generate rear-end crashes. Looking at the data, there were no crash patterns that would indicate there are any geometric or other issues on the roadway that are causing a problem. The traffic impact for the proposed residential development is determined by calculating the number of trips the development will generate during peak periods. We use the Institute of Transportation Engineers ITE Trip Generation 11th edition, and it contains trip generation for various residential, including Land Use 220 multifamily low-rise housing, Land Use 221 multifamily mid-rise, and 222 multifamily high-rise. Review of the various land uses indicate Land Use 220 is most appropriate for this development. Typically, it is a building with at least 3 other dwelling units and have 2 or 3 floors. In order to calculate the trips, we use the trip generation for the highest peak of the generator, not the adjacent traffic on the roadway. That yields a slightly higher number of trips. The adjacent roadway peak hours are sometime between 7 and 9 in the morning. A residential development will probably generate their traffic a little bit after 9. Again, in the afternoon, it may not be the same. So we use the peak generation for the development. The average daily traffic will be 54 vehicles. The morning peak hour will generate 4 vehicles, 1 entering, 3 exiting. The PM peak will generate 5 vehicles, 3 entering and 2 exiting. And during the Saturday midday peak, it's anticipated to generate 4 vehicles, 2 entering, 2 exiting. Generally, residential developments will generate significantly fewer car trips if they're within walking distance to a train station and bus stops. Several land uses in the ITE trip generation actually account for this. In some cases, it can be as much as a 40% reduction in vehicle trips. However, for Land Use 220, they do give trips for near a train station. However, it is based on a single development with 350 units. It's nowhere near comparing to this. So we anticipate that the trip generation I noted will be what the site generates or slightly less. It's our official opinion that the professional opinion that the number of trips generated by this development added to the roadway network will have little or no impact on the roadway network. And we believe that the development can be opened safely. Secondly, if you go to the next slide, please. At the police commission, there were concerns about the auto stacker and just how it works and what's involved with it. The auto stacker is a unit that is built for light uses, not industrial uses, mostly residential, apartment type buildings, someone who has a large garage who wants to get their one car out of the way. Each tenant that will use it will be given tutorial by a management company on its operation. They will need to acknowledge and sign a safety training that they received the training and read the manual. The other concern was, how do you handle cars, car on the bottom, car on the top? The auto stackers will be assigned to those tenants that have two vehicles, most likely the two-bedroom apartments. So there will be no issue that one tenant, one unit has a car on the bottom, the other unit has a car on the top. It will be the same family with the car on the top and the bottom. So there won't be any confusion as to who has to move the car and everything else. We believe that these are safe. As I said, people will be trained on how to use them. And if the person who is assigned that space only has one car, they can either park it on top of the lift or lift the lift up and park underneath it. So we don't believe that there's any safety concerns using it. I forwarded that information to Sergeant Kraniak this week, and I have yet to hear his opinion on what I provided him, but I provided it to the commission. And if that's any questions, I'll be here, and I'll turn it over to
Thank you.
Sam.
Yeah, John, a little later.
Good evening. I'm Samuel Gardner. I'm a licensed architect in the state of Connecticut. My office is located at 151 East Street, and my firm is Greg Weiss and Gardner Architects. This three-story building, it's a wood frame structure, will have 8 residential units. It's comprised of 4 two-bedrooms and 4 one-bedroom units. The first floor has 2 units. Can you go to the first floor? 2 units on near grade level, and to the rear you can see there's a covered parking area. The second floor has 2 two-bedroom units. That's the basement. There we are. Right. Two two-bedroom units and 1 bedroom unit, and then the third floor has 1 two-bedroom unit and 1 two-bedroom unit and 2 one-bedroom units. And then the building itself has a roof terrace available to the tenants. It's only at the rear of the building. The front of the building is mostly roof and could potentially be used, as said before, for photovoltaics if required. The basic gross square footage of this building is 10,000 square feet. We can go back to either of the elevations. Essentially, the building has been designed to look like it was always there. That it has a style of architecture that is similar to other nearby buildings. It reads as a 2-story building with a roof. The roof is occupied as a mansard, and there are similar buildings on the street currently that have exactly the same situation: 2 levels and a third level in a roof plane. Next slide, please. This is the material board, where we're essentially going to be proposing basically a gray siding, horizontal siding. All the materials are going to be synthetic because actually you don't build in wood anymore for exterior finishes. You either use hardy board or you use AZEC trims. The windows will be clad, but inside will be wood. The roof shingle is a synthetic roof shingle that appears like a slate roofing tile. We also have a decorative railing along the top, sort of to recall historic mansard roof style buildings. And we're proposing shutters on the front facade of the building facing Cherry Street. And there will be a frieze board just under the roof plane, which will have corbels. So it's more of a decorative detail around the top of the building. We can go to the next slide. Sectionally, what you're seeing is you're seeing 2 levels of residential in the body of the building, and then a 3rd level which is the roof, but it has units in it. And then there's a partial basement in the front of the building, only for mechanicals and the sprinkler pump and other things like that. And then we can go back and look at the rendering if that helps people understand what we're doing here. So the rendering, reveals that this building, in terms of scale, is pretty similar to all the other buildings along Cherry Street, and we were purposeful about that. We were trying to keep the corbel line pretty much lining up with other roofs in the on the street, and then you have the roof, the mansard above that, which is similar to some of the gable. And across the street, there's a MetroStar building that has a very similar massing as our building. And that's all I have for now, if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, at this point, I'd suggest that we pause for commission questions. If there's anything we can answer, I certainly have closing comments, but I don't want to preemptively do those before we answer questions and perhaps even public comment.
Very good. That's what the plan is. Would anyone like questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll have a couple questions about the auto stackers.
Sure.
So it was mentioned that, one on top of the other would be, so a single column, you could say,
Correct.
would be for a single family or household, right?
Correct.
My understanding about these is that for safety reasons, adjacent lifts, and basically if you have 3 next to each other, only one person can access them at once, because you can't have multiple people trying to get their car off the lift at the same time, because they basically, I know there are different designs, but they basically come down and they go sideways and let you access your car. So would it be the case that of the 6 stacking spaces, or 8 maybe? 4 stacking spaces, but 8 total cars.
Correct.
Only one could be accessed at a time, or is it just one at a time within each stack of 2?
If I understand your question, I keep saying commissioner, but board member, I am not familiar with I did not see anything when we were looking into the auto stackers, and if Mr. Ullman has something to add on this, I did not see anything saying that the stackers could only be accessed one at a time. If you can imagine just the column, the surface space with a stacker above it will be designated to one unit, most likely the 2-bedroom units. So certainly you can only access the stacker, or you have to remove the car underneath, of course, to bring the stacker down. I am not familiar with any restriction limiting more than one stacker coming down at any given time, because the stacker actually comes down like a lift. It does not turn in any way.
Okay. Maybe I was looking at a different model when I was
And there
reading
certainly
it.
are a number of models, so you may have been looking at that, but, snuck up on me.
I haven't delved deeply into it, but one of their selling points for this model is that the table goes straight up, straight down, doesn't transition in either back or sideways. It doesn't rotate, it just goes straight down within the footprint and stays there. In terms of, do you want to be operating the two adjacent ones side by side? I doubt it. It depends on what units they put in. They have units with single power packs and units that have one power pack that powers the whole group. So I imagine there may be interlocks if that's a problem, but there is no transition. It just goes up and down straight.
Okay. My other question, or another question about that, and it might be also directed to our staff, Mr. Harris, as well, but my understanding from the police commission's meeting was that the concern was partly just that we hadn't had something like this in the city before. So I know that some cities have, this is more routine. Do cities that have, auto stackers routinely typically have regulations or building codes that regulate the safety of these? Because they look like quite complex pieces of machinery. I wouldn't be confident just walking up to one and, pressing a button.
Mr. Ullman snuck up on me and then snuck away. I will say, board member, that I am not familiar with any code provision or regulation or ordinance regulating these types of auto stackers. You are correct that they are very common in a number of cities, and I can tell you that this applicant or affiliates of this applicant have successfully used these in other developments. In terms of the proposed safety, in researching the auto stacker product, if you will, these are meant to range from personal garage use, as you can see from the photo here, so they're meant to be safe, user-friendly, something that you can put into your own home if you'd wish, and then you can scale them up depending on the product and the number that you get for commercial uses. So they're intentionally designed to be safe. They do meet the applicable national safety standards for car lifts, and that is on the Auto Stacker website. But like any piece of equipment that you have, or any high-tech amenity that you'd have in a multifamily development, or any development, whether it be commercial, residential, the tenants who will be using this will receive training from the landlord on how to properly use them. There will be rules in place about their proper use, and we are, as the applicant, entitled to the legal presumption that our tenants will comply with those rules. So in terms of safety, we have no concerns here. The most motivated person to ensure that there are no safety concerns, or motivated entity, if you will, is the applicant. Happy tenants, happy owner. So that's certainly something that we take very seriously, but they are very commonly used. We're not familiar with any regulations at this point.
Thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you. Any further questions at this point, Mr. Anderson?
Thank you. Will there be an on-site superintendent or an off-site property manager?
Board member, I do not believe that there will be an on-site superintendent, but I will look to my team if there will be off-site property manager. There will be an off-site property manager that will be accessible to the tenants should there be any questions about the auto stackers or anything else.
Thanks. Under present ownership, because the applicant is the current owner, what's the understanding among residents, the tenants, about not parking their vehicles in the driveway?
In the driveway, to understand, in the driveway, not in the parking
Is there
spots.
presently signage, or is there some restriction contained in the leases at the present time?
I'm not familiar with the lease restrictions. I'll look to my team to see if there's any. Do you want to come up? I'm going to ask Mr. Gordon to just opine on that.
Again, Jeff Gordon, there will be a fire lane marking along the building to prohibit that kind of parking. Yeah, thank you.
I asked that present.
I am not familiar, Commissioner, or Board Member, excuse me, I am not familiar with any issues at this point with parking concerns. That was not something that I'm familiar with.
Another area that I wanted some clarification on is about the grassy area. Under this plan, what is now grass in both the side yard, front yard, and back is gone. Is that correct?
There is a landscaping area that is going to be in the front of the building, but the area in the back will be gone. There is an area to the side that will be retained. I don't know if you're talking about landscaping or if you're talking about further drainage, or both.
I'm talking about landscaping.
Yeah.
Could you describe that a little more thoroughly?
Sure.
And tell me what the status of the mature tree is in the front yard?
Just one moment, board member. I think he's just getting a copy of the plans. Thank you.
Right now, there is shown a Japanese red maple tree there that's got some age on it. It would, if it was assessed, it would probably need to be cabled because of the weakness in the trunk line there, but it does have a few years left in it, and it would be our plan. If we could save it, we will. Otherwise, we are proposing to replace that with a Shade Master honey locust tree.
How old a tree is it, Mrs. Gordon?
Well, listen, I wasn't there when it was planted, but I would probably guess it's probably somewhere around 25 years or so.
Okay, thank you. One other question. I have a question for Mr. Wee-Wing. With the new fire hydrant that's recommended by the fire marshal, where is that likely to be? Do you know?
Per his recommendations and their code, we have to be within 100 feet of the building connection.
150 feet?
No, 100 feet of the building connection. So wherever that connection is set up to the building, he's requesting a hydrant to be within 100 feet of that.
Thanks very much.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just to Board Member Anderson, we're happy to accept a condition of approval that the applicant make reasonable efforts to save or preserve the existing red maple there. So that can certainly be commemorated in the approval.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Have you also considered floating the affordable housing units so that it may very well be that you're starting out with, of the three, one is a one-bedroom, one is a two-bedroom, one is a three-bedroom, but possibly float them depending upon your vacancy rate. So you may have two bedrooms that are affordable and one bedroom that's affordable. Have you considered that?
So the way, that's interesting, interesting comment, board member. The way 830G works is there's a next available unit rule, if you will. And I know you're talking about designations between the two bedrooms and the one bedrooms, but the way it works is if you have an affordable unit that the household has a change of circumstances and no longer qualifies for the affordable unit, they're given the option to stay at market rate rents, or they can leave and then someone else comes in. Given that there will be times throughout this 40-year affordability period where units that were affordable on January 1 are no longer affordable on, we'll say, November 1st or whatever it may be. So the next available unit that becomes available or becomes open, the applicant or the owner will make reasonable efforts to ensure that that is an affordable unit. So because of that, just the way that works, and depending on the applicants that you have and the waiting list that may be available, there may be some floating here, certainly. If a unit becomes available and they need another affordable unit, they may certainly get someone in there who meets the affordability requirements. But because of that, and given the size of the development here, we do need some flexibility. So we've kept it intentionally that we haven't outlined what those units will be or where they are to allow for that flexibility as people move and have changes in circumstance.
Thanks. And one further question, Mr. Chair, which is about the fact that you have two buildings that are twins, built in 1920, thereabouts, very, very similar in design for that period of time. So both 1315 and 1719 are very much same type of character with 2 units each and flat roofs, porches, etc. So I wondered if there is in our packet a review from either the local Milford Preservation Trust, the State Office of Preservation, something that provides documentation on either or both of those structures. A little more clarification, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the packet does not contain a letter from the State Historic Preservation Office or the local Historic Preservation Commission. There was a discussion, I believe, either right before we filed the application or simultaneously with the filing, that because this is located in on the National Register, we would have to go to the Historic Preservation Commission for a certificate of appropriateness. My colleague engaged in a discussion back and forth with Mr. Sulkus about this issue. We ended up issuing a memo in May, and that's at your supplemental packet. I believe it's at tab 3 of your supplemental package, explaining that when the ordinance pertaining to historic preservation was passed, it was not done appropriately, and there have been a number of homeowners subject to that ordinance on its face who have challenged it. But in any event, putting that aside, the Historic Preservation Commission, if a certificate of appropriateness is required here, it would be required prior to the issuance of a demolition permit. So we essentially said, we disagree that it applies to us, but let's go through zoning first anyways, which in our opinion is the more practical and logical way to go about things, because the board could impose certain changes to the plan, or as the board knows, plans evolve during the zoning process, so it wouldn't really make sense to go to historic preservation first and then zoning when changes may occur. So we essentially suggested to Mr. Sulkus that we're going to be challenging the applicability of that ordinance. Certainly, we're going through what we call the opt-out procedure, or what other property owners call the opt-out procedure, but in any event, to the extent the certificate is necessary, we will certainly get it before demolition is necessary.
Well, what would apply is when the demolition is applied for, there would be a stay for a certain period of time. I believe it's 90 days?
The demolition delay.
Right.
Generally, that's the case,
Right.
yes.
That would apply.
Yeah, again, we're challenging the applicability of that, but I think that's neither here nor there, because it doesn't foreclose the board's review here. And if and when that becomes an issue, we will certainly go to the Historic Preservation Commission as needed.
Thanks for that clarification. And thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair, board members.
Yes, any other questions or comments at this point?
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
Over here.
Oh, hello, Stephen.
Just picking up on what Mr. Anderson said, the letter from Hurwitz, Sager, and Schlossberg and Nuff, giving their opinion on the Historic District Commission and the opt-out. Long story short is that they recommend that should this board approve this project, that a condition of approval will be a certificate of appropriateness before the issuance of a zoning permit. Yep.
Thank you for that.
Mr. Chairman, may I just say one thing on that?
Yes.
If the commission wanted to impose that condition, the applicant accepts that, we would just suggest respectfully that the commission, I keep saying commission, I'm sorry, that the board, if it imposes such a condition, it does so with the caveat that a certificate of appropriateness will be obtained prior to the issuance of a zoning permit if legally necessary. Because if it's determined, as we state in our memorandum, that the ordinance does not apply to the site, then no certificate of appropriateness would be required here. So it protects the board in that we would have to get the certificate if legally necessary, but it also protects the applicant that if the challenge to the ordinance is successful, whether by ourselves or another applicant, then we're not chasing an approval that doesn't apply to us. Just a suggestion.
Understood. Yeah, it'll be up to the board to make the motion the way they feel fit, but I do appreciate and understand your position. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Sadie.
Thank you very much. Counsel, this would probably be, God
I'm
bless
sorry.
you. That'd be fine. This would be probably about the middle board and the layout looking at it. I'm looking where the parking is going to fit in. And we got a lot of maps, and it's great, but where's the parking going to fit in? So if somebody could just address, it appears it's going to be, as we're looking at this board, I think it was used for your siting, but I'm not sure if you're going to be, somebody said 4 spots, 8 spots? And
Yeah.
if you could just explain that to us, please.
Absolutely, and I can do that, and if there are additional questions about the site, we can turn
Thank
to
you.
the CODIS Bodie team. So we have here, and it's a bit difficult because of the microphone, we have covered parking, covered surface parking, right here at the rear of the building. There are 3 spaces there, one of which is handicapped accessible. So those are 3 spaces. There is a 4th space, surface parking, that's beyond the covered portion of the building, right here in this area. And then last but not least, you have 4 surface spaces, which are those hatched spaces that the board sees here at the rear of the site or the south of the site. And those hatched spaces, 4 surface spaces with the 4 auto stackers on top of them. So altogether you have 8 surface spaces plus the 4 auto stackers. That's how we get to the 12.
Okay, so and I'm glad you clarified that, because there's also going to have to be a structure for the auto stackers, and I don't see that in the site plan or the site application.
If you may, would you mind clarifying what do you mean by a structure?
I'm assuming that the stackers are going to be covered by something.
They do not need to be covered, and actually, Mr. Harris, if you wouldn't mind going to, I believe it's slide 8. If you could zoom out so the board could see. So this is just an example of what they look like. Obviously, this isn't a garage, so it's by default covered. And then we have an example of what they look like, but from what we understand and the way this was designed, they do not need to be covered. There does not need to be a covering to them.
And if we expect that we're going to have young people, children here, how do they get protected? Normally, if you think about a pool, there's ordinances and requirements that the pool must be completely, have fencing around it so they will not get injured.
Understood, and again, we're going to be training the residents here on how to appropriately use these. There will be safeguards in place. I don't believe you can just go up to the auto stacker and press a button and it will turn on. There will be certain safeguards to that to prevent tampering from people who are not allowed to be using them.
But I just guess the question is, if, kids are just out there kicking a ball around, they run into that, and there's no vehicle, and they get injured. I just want to make sure that it's safety, and I'm concerned about the safety, listening to how this is now set up. I thought it was under the building, under the enclosed portion of the building, but it's open.
Well, board member, I would say that if the auto stackers are just lifted or extended, if you will, and they're not moving, and a child kicks a ball and hits it, it would be the same thing as if they kick the ball and the ball hits the corner of the building. There would be no difference in the safety there. It's just a structure that they will have to avoid, as you would or I would when we're walking and circulating through a site. So in your hypothetical, if I understand it, in our opinion, there is no safety concern. It's the same as you would avoid a structure or a car that's parked there for that matter.
Thank you. And the last thing I'm going to find, Mr. Chair, you haven't addressed the police report, and you've provided a lot of materials to us, but you've not provided the minutes nor the action taken by the police commission in reference to their view of traffic. Could you explain that, why it's not in our package, why you're not addressing it?
So we were not, as far as I'm aware from the rest of my team, we were not aware that the police commissioners had met and discussed this application until we received notification, I think through an article that we had read. So we were not aware that it was discussed. We did reach out to the police department to engage in a discussion, I believe, and I'll ask Mr. Ullman to come up if you could talk to that, because I wasn't privy to those conversations, but we did have preliminary discussions with them, but their final decision, if you will, or their final commentary has not been made available to us. Mr. Ullman did keep sneaking up on this side. Mr. Ullman did send a wealth of information to the police department on the auto stackers, including the manual, description about the safety standards, et cetera, but we have not yet heard back. So it was not intentional that we omitted that from the package. We were just trying to ascertain and get some more clarity from the police department on that specifically. But I'll have Mr. Ullman just describe his discussions.
Yes. Steve Ullman with Alfred Benish. According to Sergeant Kriniak, the commission was concerned about a couple of things. One was the safe operation of the units, which we've addressed by making sure that people will be trained, they have to sign off on the safety, and it's just going to be one person. They were concerned about movement because they didn't know how they worked. They just go up and down. Having them outdoors, is it safe? They're designed to live outdoors in the weather. They're fully powder coated and greased. The control units are weatherproof, and it's a hydraulic system. It's not an electric system. And those were the basic concerns that Sergeant Kriniak presented to me. Just general. They were also concerned about having them proliferate throughout the town, and which is something we can't address. But that's really what they were concerned about. And I gave Sergeant Kriniak all the information I had. Like I said, I had never looked at the actual units themselves, so I'm kind of, the expert because I've read the manual, I guess.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. No further questions.
Any further questions before we open the public hearing? Yep.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
How many other of these contraptions have you seen or presented to boards in this state in the last, say, 10 years?
Myself personally, this will be the first one, but I will say that I have seen a number of applications coming forward with this because there has been generally a move, frankly nationwide, to reduce surface parking. It ties in with the reduction of impervious surfaces, moving forward with environmentally sensitive planning. It's a space-conscious way to incorporate additional parking without needing larger sites and increasing impervious surface. So I personally have not worked on an application, or I too sit on a commission, so I have not heard of an application come before us with these auto stackers, but I have seen them in other developments and have seen that they've become more and more popular for those reasons.
Thank you. Any further questions at this time, or should we open up the public hearing? Yep, Mike.
Just one comment. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll be quick. It's my understanding we have two misunderstandings here, two disagreements. It's the stackers, the police department are unsure of this and rejected it, I believe, at the meeting. And the other would be the historical commission. There's a disagreement there as well. I just want to determine where we're standing.
Absolutely.
That's correct.
Respectfully, I disagree. I'm going to have to,
I understand your position, but there is a disagreement between this letter from Mr. Schlossberg or Mr.
Yes,
Nero.
Attorney Suchins, yes. So on the historic side of things, we disagree. The disagreement is whether or not a certificate of appropriateness is necessary, because whether or not the ordinance applies to this site. That does not foreclose, and in fact, Attorney Suchins in her letter specifically says that certificate of appropriateness would be necessary for a demolition permit, which comes after zoning. So the agreement or the discussion that was had with Mr. Sulkus was that we would essentially delay that determination, go through zoning, which, as I said, makes better sense because sometimes the plans change through zoning, and then work out the application of that. So there is a disagreement on that, if you want to use that phrase, but it doesn't impact the board's purview or decision here. On the police side of things, I wouldn't phrase it, of course I'm the lawyer in the room, I'm not going to phrase it as a disagreement, right? There is a an opportunity for education, I guess is what it was. We understood after we were not aware that there was going to be a discussion about the auto stackers. We found out after the fact, and then we opened up communication with the police department to discuss the auto stackers. And I think there was just a general sense, which I'm sensing from the board as well, about unfamiliarity with this product. So there needed to be additional information submitted, which we did submit to the police department today, or not today, earlier this week, but we have not heard back. So I think it was just more a question as to how these units work, how they will work here on this site, the implications in Greater Milford, and so on.
Yeah, certainly, yeah. I mean, you see them in bigger cities, but around here, this is kind of novel, so.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, my question is also about the stackers. You know, they're new to us. We're just trying to understand, you know, how they work, and concerned about the safety of the residents, which is what the police commissioner also said in their unanimous denial of the request. So Mr. Altman said there were safeguards in place, and I was just wondering what safeguards are in place?
I'll ask him to come back up here, board.
What type of safety mechanism will stop this from coming down on somebody or something?
My understanding is that the way these are designed is as they go up at different heights, they lock going up. And once you get into a locked position, it will hold 8,000 pounds, 8,000, 6,000 pounds, I think it's 6,000 pounds, indefinitely. That's the way they're designed. Then you have to disengage the lock to lower it. And beyond that, I'm now beyond my reading of the manual.
What's to stop it from coming on its way down if something was under it?
I do not have an answer for. I imagine there is
Kind
something.
of like a garage door, it'll
Yeah, I know. I mean,
sense
since
and stop.
it has been certified by different safety organizations, I would imagine, but I'm guessing. But that's my gut.
Is there a key that operates this, or does?
I would imagine that's what they're going to have as a key for it.
I believe, and board member, don't quote me on this, but when I was doing some research on the auto stackers, I believe there are different ways that you can operate it depending on what product you actually purchase. So I believe there are, for lack of a better phrase, almost like portals, if you will, that you can just press a button. Those are probably more for individual unit users, like what you see on the screen here, a personal garage. But then there are more involved units, I believe, that from what I recall did have keys and other safeguards like that. But we can certainly get the board more information on that if that's something that they would want.
Which one is the applicant putting in? Which product?
It would certainly be the safest availability here. So, but again, we could get the board more information. I'm hearing some questions about the auto stacker and the police department's review. So we could get the board more information on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions before we open up to the public? Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, same thing with the lift. When it snows and there's ice and all this stuff, if you have rollers, how can you have that outside without it affecting the hydraulics or the mechanics of it going up and down with this kind of, I'm assuming you're going to have something equivalent to this, or like a garage, like a car. Yeah.
So I'm certainly not an engineer, but I know that these units were built for all weather. So they are used throughout the Northeast. I know they have them in New York and other larger cities, and they're again popping up more and more in smaller cities and municipalities as well for the reasons we discussed. They are built to withstand snow, ice, etc. I can't tell you what.
I can see that getting stuck. I mean, I guarantee you that it would withstand it, but then you would have to thaw it out if it's on a roller, and then it would get stuck up there.
I'm not sure that's the case, board member. Again, because they were designed to be all weather, I cannot imagine that they would have moved forward with a product that would need to be thawed before you could get your vehicle down. But again, we can get some additional information on that.
All right. There's some traffic. So you said this is outside, so my question about the card model means nothing because it just goes up, there's nothing stopping it. And then you said, is this battery or a electric, because batteries, like I said, also in the winter with Teslas and everything, they stop working when it gets too cold. And they also overheat and they don't work in the summer.
Board member, I will get back to you on that. I'm not positive. My gut reaction says electric, but I don't want to say something that is not the case, so I will get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to open it up to the public.
Thank you.
So this is a public hearing. If you'd like to speak to this issue, please come to the podium, state your name and address, and try to keep your comments to about 3 minutes. Thank you much.
I don't recognize anybody. My name's John Pagliano, 325 Meadowside Road, and like I said, I don't recognize anybody here. That's a nice looking building. I live on Meadowside Road. I understand that this building is going on a 1/4 acre property. I live on a 3/4 acre corner lot, and when my kids come over with my grandchildren, I can't find a place to hide. It's that bad. I think we're trying to squeeze a lot of people. I thought we had a moratorium on condos, and no more moratorium? Because I know they're building another 80 units on Meadowside, which I'll be here to talk to you about another time. The problem I have with that building there is we're just building them higher and we're squeezing them and we're putting in car stackers, and where's all the hydraulic fluid and the oil from the cars going to go? I mean, it's right up the street here near the river. So environmentally, it's an issue. I've been in construction my whole life, so we've been doing these kind of things. Car stackers are great, but some people can't figure out how to cook minute rice, and you're going to tell them how to get your car out from underneath someone who's in a hurry to get out. I just don't see that working, number one. Number two, I don't care what sprinkler system you have, nothing puts out hydraulic grease fires and gasoline. So if there's ever a fire there, the building's gone. That's my opinion. I like the building. I think it's trying to squeeze too much into a small area. There's a lot of apartments, and these cars are stacked underneath. They did the same thing on my street on Meadowside, but there's individual spots for all the cars, for all the condos. My only problem is they built too many of them on my street, but they're done tactfully, they're spread out, there's enough parking in the garage and enough parking outside the garage if you have a guest. I don't see that here. And I'm not really against this project, because I even told the guy it's a beautiful looking building. It's going to stick out like a sore thumb compared to what's there, but that's my opinion. Again, I'm not here to knock the project. I'm just here environmentally and safety-wise. I don't know if anybody of you ever saw a car fire in a stackable garage, but I have in Chicago. It's not fun. Anyway, good luck with your project, and I hope you're our police in Milford. You're our police. When one person sells their property, that property tax is now spread on 15 people living there. So we get more taxes. Every car dealership that goes in, every condo that gets in, we get more taxes. That's great for us. But let's quiet down what we're building here. We're getting bigger and bigger and higher, and we're not thinking about stuff going into water.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
How you doing? My name's Ralph Malafront. I own 21 Cherry Street, 25 Cherry Street, and building right next door. They've been referenced the driveway, the shared driveway, that like they own it, okay? I own it, okay? It's part of my property, number one. It's called, since 1913, it's been called a pathway. So there's an easement to get onto their property, okay? The last people that owned the property asked me if they could park a certain way to use their parking lot, and I granted that. On their property, there's a concrete slab where a garage was, okay? So when they pulled into using the easement, they would pull straight into their garage. Right now, they're pulling this way. That was an easement. So what they're proposing now is not what I allowed the last owners to do. That's the first thing. My second question is, have they done a survey on this property yet? Does anybody know that? I don't see any markers. My next question is, when all these new tenants move in, they have guests, where are they going to park? On my property? Most likely. Not a go. And when it snows, where are they putting the snow? There's no room to move on this piece of property. And the dumpster, where's the dumpster going? I don't know where the dumpster is and how they're picking it up. I mean, these are legitimate questions. I don't see any answers on this thing. And I'm looking at, can I look over here and look at this thing here?
Mr. Malfron, if you would address the questions to the board, then I will ask them when they come back to rebut to answer all your questions.
In the 4 parking spots at the end of the property. I don't see how they get into those parking spots.
That's a valid question. I will have
Okay.
I will ask the question to the applicant
Doesn't-
at the appropriate
doesn't
time.
show me, okay?
Yep.
And what else I gotta go? That's about it. I think they're legitimate questions, and I need answers about, mostly about where they're parking and how much room I got to give them to access. It sounds like they're accessing their property off of my parking lot, not off of my driveway.
I'll ask that question as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions or comments from the board? I mean, from the public.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Valerie. I'm at 372 Wheelers Farms Road.
And your last name, please, Valerie.
Smith. Okay, so I've never been to one of these. I'm a property manager though, so I just have a couple of questions. What if the tenants don't want to use it? If they're elderly and it's kind of, you know, an inconvenience for them to do so? Or like, just questions, what if you have a pickup and your wife has an Audi, you have 2 really big cars, you know, the capacity of weight, I know you said was 8,000 pounds, but the size of your vehicles, just curious about it. Like, I have no stake in the matter, I have questions. And if you don't want to use it, will you be denied moving in? A question about that. A question associated with if you are one of those units that have to have that garage portion, will you be required to have a certain amount of renter's insurance to cover the cost of if you break it? Just small things I was thinking about. That's all.
Yeah, good questions. Thank you. Mr. Malfront, you'll have another chance after the applicant has a rebuttal, but keep your thought. So yeah, if you would come back and if you need to be refreshed on any of the questions that I'm going to require you to answer, I will.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I took some notes. If I do miss anything, certainly, but I will say it sounds like that, just procedurally, if you will, it sounds like the board needs some additional information on the auto stackers, including commentary from the police department. And I'm seeing a lot of nods. So I think generally what we'd suggest, I understand that the board has a special meeting scheduled for next week. We would suggest that this...
We do not have a special meeting for next week.
Oh, I misunderstood. I thought there was a meeting scheduled for the 23rd.
You misunderstood.
Okay, apologies. So with that, I presume the board, I keep saying commission, is going to want to continue the public hearing so that we can submit that additional information on the auto stackers. And we will respond to some of these questions in writing in more detail. But for now, regarding concerns about where people will park, and in no particular order, I'm just going through my notes, I'll say generally that at probably every multifamily community that I've worked on, there are always concerns about parking. And generally speaking, many of the multifamily developments that I work on, if not all of them, are overparked. The applicant no one has a greater interest in ensuring that their tenants have sufficient parking than the applicant. Because as I said, happy tenants, happy owner. So here this applicant is an experienced real estate developer, has other multifamily communities, and believes that the parking here is appropriate. Keep in mind also, just generally speaking, in terms of parking, because this segues into where people will park and things like that. You are located within less than, I believe, a third of a mile to a train station. You have 3 public bus stops in the area, so the presumption that there will be too many cars on site is just that. It's a presumption. You're seeing more and more people not having cars on site. So with that said, regarding visitor parking and things like that, the site will be appropriately signed. There will, I'm sure, be rules in the leases that will prevent the residents and their visitors from parking illegally, whether that be on someone else's property or illegally on this property. And we're entitled to a presumption that our residents and their visitors will comply with that, and we stand by that. Regarding snow storage, there was a question about, there is a snow storage area on site, but to the extent there is a large storm and the storage area on site cannot hold all of that snow, the snow will be carted off site by a contractor to ensure that people can maneuver appropriately on site. And then there was a discussion, and I apologize, I did not catch his name, the abutting owner to the east of the site regarding the driveway. So the board, we did do a survey. It's in our plan set, and the board will note that there is a new and expanded, if the board looks at sheet SP1, which is the site plan, there is a new and expanded driveway apron. So I'm looking at my team. The driveway is expanding beyond the size that it currently is, correct? So my team is confirming what I'm reading on the plan. So we understand that the shared driveway was previously on the neighbor's property, and we have that memorandum that we issued in May explaining our right we did research in the deeds for this property and the abutting property. We have the right to continue using what used to be called the Pentway there. But even notwithstanding that, we are expanding the driveway onto our property. So it will continue to be a shared access. I just wanted to make that clear. It's not exclusively on the abutting property owners, notwithstanding our right to continue using that. Let me see. What if tenants don't want to use it? To that, I would say, practically speaking, it would be the same as if any of you or if myself were looking for an apartment or looking for a home. If it did not meet my needs or I did not want to use such an amenity, then I would look for another home. It wouldn't fit with what I'd be looking for. The same if you're looking for a 3-bedroom unit and they only have a 1-bedroom unit, you'd keep on looking. So the parking situation will be described to any potential renter, any potential resident, and if it's not something that they're comfortable using, then it will certainly be their decision to whether or not to continue forward with the rental process. So, Mr. Chairman, I think I hit some of the high notes.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate that. And then when you look at the easement and I didn't see any description of the width of the easement. So if you clarify your position on that when you come back, as well as are you going to show me the turning radius to get into the parking spaces that are outside, and the turning radius to get into the parking spaces that are inside. And you know, my particular concern with the car lifts is that you can tell me that someone's going to be educated, but I'm going to tell you that there's people that go and run around in other people's backyards and go play in the in other properties. So I think that we have a serious problem with whether it's fencing or whether it's a building, lockable, to prevent an accident. You know, and again, I think that you know, more detail on the actual machinery that you're going to propose, and that will be part of the approval, so you'll have to stick to it, I think is very critical. And I think the fail-safe, that that Mark brought up, similar to what a garage door opener, which would be a lot less impactful for an accident, a garage door, than this lift if it malfunctions. So the police have not given us the okay yet, and we don't have the detail on what specific equipment you are going to propose. So I think that that's some of the things that we'd like to see when you come back. If, without objection, and then we'll take any questions you want, without objection, I would keep the hearing open and postpone it until the next meeting. But go ahead, Tom.
Before, I'm sorry. I agree with you, Jimmy, but just before we break for tonight, I would like to hear from the adjoining property owner one more time.
Sure enough. And then Eton next, and then Mr. Malfront, when you come up.
You brought up this May 29 letter, Attorney Gomes. And in the letter, it discusses this Historic Preservation Commission, and that it's stated here that the ordinance is being challenged by several property owners, is not legally valid. In which forum are those challenges occurring?
I believe, board member, that there was a letter, and again, I can clarify this for the next hearing. I believe that there was a letter to town staff disputing the need for a certificate of appropriateness, and there was at least some discussion about potential litigation.
But no litigation's been filed, is that accurate?
I am not positive on that, so I will clarify for the next board meeting. I know that there are existing challenges to the ordinance, but I'm not positive, so I will clarify that for the next meeting.
Thank you.
And then Mr. Malfront, would you come up to the podium? Mr. Collegian would like to ask you a question.
Yes. No, I don't have any questions. I just think that if you want to come up and you're right next door, you're entitled to come on up and speak tonight. We're going to keep this public hearing open, but that means you'd have to come back. If you want to get it done tonight, I'm all ears.
Pardon me?
If you'd like to say more tonight.
I would like to hear from you if you have more to add. You're the very important part of this since you're the adjoining property owner.
You know, my big thing is they're trying to build this monstrosity on a 50 by 200 foot lot, okay? I want to see how they're going to knock it down and build this thing without impeding on my property. It's going to be a miracle. But that's their problem, correct? See you later.
Thank you, Mr. Malafront. And again, one of the concerns that he brought up was access, turning radius, and the like, whether you end up defining the width of your easement or patchway or whatever it was called, so we know really what right you do have. All right,
Understood.
thank you.
And some of those details, if I may, Mr. Chairman, they're in our memo, but we will clarify them in a supplemental filing just so the commission has it easily accessible.
Yeah, and if you can show us turning radiuses on the blueprint, on the site plan, and have the engineer identify how that is compliant with standards.
Understood.
Without objection, we will continue this and keep the hearing open. Stephen, would you want to do the staff report now? I probably should have had you do it before, or do you want to wait till next meeting?
Mr. Chairman, is this a new staff report?
What we do here generally is before we start, we have the staff go over their report that they've put in writing, but just to highlight anything they feel should be highlighted.
Understood. May I have a copy? Or is that?
I'm sure you do.
Is it Mr. Podolsky's comments? That was, I believe, I'm not sure.
No,
I
it's
received a copy of the staff report.
It was done on Monday because we were awaiting the revisions to come in. And so it was done Monday. I think it was sent out late Monday. And I assume that it was, I know it was sent to the members of the board. Basically, at this point, we talked about the stackers, that more information was needed. I spoke with a member of the team, and he explained it a bit more to me, but I think it was something that needed to be addressed more. We pointed out that it was an 830G, and so our analysis didn't really look at the conformance, normal conformance with the zoning as a setbacks or anything else. Also, the parking, I think it's recognized. I mean, we had the questions too about what about visitor parking. The parking regulations certainly didn't meet the city zoning regulations, but let's see, section 8-2D9 of the state statutes, and if I'm wrong on that quotation, what that, as I'm sure one of the attorneys here will correct me, but it actually requires that municipal zoning regulations for multifamily residential cannot require more than one parking space for a one-bedroom and 2 parking spaces for 2-bedroom units. So this one just meets that requirement with the stackers. I had a question about the trash area, that it's blocked by a parking space, and I think in the discussions they indicated that that they'll make sure it's done at times that there's not sufficient, there's not a lot of parking. I assume that means midday during the week. And also, I think this just brought up is the snow storage. I don't recall seeing that indicated on the plan. And I think that's, given the tightness of the site, I think that's certainly a legitimate question.
Yeah, that would be good if you could identify that as well as the dumpster when you come back with an augmented, clouded site plan to address these questions.
Understood. Mr. Chairman, I just looked at my colleague. We did not receive a copy of the staff report.
Then we will make sure you get it.
Absolutely, thank you. And just so the commission knows, while we have it up on the landscaping plan behind the stackers or to the west of the stackers, there is a snow storage area indicated.
Right.
Just right here, just eliminating one of the low-hanging fruit, if you will.
Right. Understood.
Understood, thank you. So I'll be in contact with Ms. LaFawn for a copy of that staff report.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is held open and sent to be on the agenda for the next meeting. So we do have another applicant, so if you'd exit quietly, I'd appreciate it. Next order of business is proposed regulation change, 24-3 petition of Timothy Hollister Esquire for a change to Milford zoning regulations, Article 3, Section 366, Adaptive Reuse Design District, to allow construction of a mixed-use development at MAP 96, Block 915, Parcel 12, of which Wheelers Farms Partners, LLC, and Greenview Equities, LLC, are the owners. You have 2 items on the agenda. Would you like to address them together?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I will read the second. The second is proposed adaptive reuse design district, ARDD, petition of Timothy Hollister Esquire for an establishment of an ARDD subdistrict at 470-488 Wheelers Farms Road at map 96, block 915, parcel 12, of which Wheelers Farms Partners LLC and Greenview Equities LLC are the owners. The applicant has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Commission members. I'm Attorney Tim Hollister, representing the applicant, Wheelers Farms Partners LLC and Greenview Equities LLC. I'm assisted by my colleague Andrew Moran, who's over with Mr. Miller and Mr. Harris. Mr. Max Olbaum is here, representing the ownership group. And with me tonight as presenters are John Milone and Vince McDermott from SLR Consulting. Mr. Milone is a professional engineer. Mr. McDermott is a professional planner. And our consulting architect who will present tonight is Walter Ploskin from the firm of Niles Bolton, which is based in Atlanta, but he's in the Washington, D.C. office. Also present, part of our team, are Chuck Corsi, Corsi & Company. Mr. Corsi has handled what I will call community outreach. We talked to the Chamber of Commerce, neighboring property owners, the Economic Development Commission here in Milford about the proposal, and then Chris O'Hara from Caldwell Banker Commercial, who is a real estate broker and has been helping us with economic and leasing issues. Let me just touch a moment on procedural compliance. Notice was timely published in the Milford Mirror. The abutter certified mailing for the rezoning was completed as required. The sign was posted. Copies of the proposed regulation, statement of uses, and rezoning map were filed with the city clerk 2 weeks ago, and we provided Ms. LaFond with an affidavit of compliance last week governing all of the things I just mentioned. I do want to thank the city and the board staff, Ms. LaFond, Mr. Miller, Mr. Harris, and if you're listening, Mr. Sulkus, thank you. I hope you're feeling better. The application package was originally filed in March of 2024. After comments from city staff, we revised it, and that is dated May 15th. And that is
Excuse me for 1 second. We need to not have any board chatter because Sue is trying to keep accurate notes, and she's distracted. So please stop that. Thank you. Go ahead, sir. Yes. I apologize for interrupting.
No, that's okay. The revised application dated May 15th, I believe that's the one that was sent to you electronically, and I think also delivered in hard copy, and that's what's before you tonight. Last week we sent as some supplemental information some articles, national articles, recently published about mixed use and adaptive reuse, which we will talk about at some length tonight. And then we've just given you a copy of each of the slides that we will be presenting in the course of our remarks tonight. I do want to note on the agenda tonight are the zoning regulation amendment and the rezoning of the subject property, but we'll also be presenting the statement of uses and standards and the preliminary development plan, and those illustrate the rezoning and the regulation. So it's all essentially one package intended to work together, but we will be touching on all of those elements. So the subject property up on the screen is, there's 2 aerial photographs in your first 2 pages in your hard copy package. 47 acres in total, hard by the Merritt Parkway, and design office, DO25 is the applicable zone. So the current use is 5 office buildings, total of 460,000 square feet, and a multi-level parking garage built in the mid-1980s. The reason we're here is that the office park is having quite an economic difficulty, and this is a national problem. In very sort of round numbers, in the 2010s, the office sector started to see decreasing demand for office space, especially in older office parks that were just only office parks with relatively few amenities. And then the sort of the second shoe that dropped was, of course, the pandemic, where you had a further demand, a drop in the demand for office space due in part to the rise of remote work. So at this point, for the last couple years, this office park, 5 buildings, 460,000 square feet, is approximately 30% occupied. And that is just not sustainable. And I will say that and the owners who bought this property in foreclosure in late 2021 originally made some efforts to try to rejuvenate the park as an office park. They rehabbed the buildings, tried to put in additional amenities, and it was not successful in attracting additional office park tenants. So the national response to this type of problem, as illustrated in the articles that we gave you, these underutilized office parks, is 2 parts: adaptive reuse and mixed use. And adaptive reuse means you reduce the office space to a sustainable level and rehab it with more modern amenities and better looking materials and so forth. And then you add to the mix the mixed uses, surround the office with residential, some mix of residential, commercial, retail, recreational amenities like trails and fitness centers, all intended to try to create what we call a regional destination for people who do not work in the office buildings on the site. It's essential, and this has been shown over and over again around the country. It has to be high quality design and materials. There has to be a dramatic transformation of the office park, the out-of-date office park, to something new and exciting. There needs to be ample parking, but also green space. And there is a regional, not too far away example, which is called the Corbin District, which is in Darien. It's right at exits 11 and 12 off I-95. And in the supplemental materials that we gave you last week, I gave you some information about the Corbin District. It's not exactly apples to apples, but it does have the same mix of office, retail, commercial, and residential as is being proposed here. So basically, the other reason we're here is that this property, this 47 acres, is an excellent candidate for adaptive reuse and mixed use. In its prime, all 5 of these buildings were fully or almost fully utilized, so this property has a history of essentially full utilization, including the full traffic use of those 5 buildings. As you can see, it's adjacent to the Merritt. The neighboring uses are the Merritt I-95 connector, the Boys and Girls Village, and then the multifamily uses at Southwick across the street, across Wheelers Farm Road, and the Muse, which opened about 3 or 4 years ago directly to the southwest. There's existing sewer, water, and utilities, and in total, the planning goal here is positive impacts for the city and what we have tried to promote as a win-win for the property and the region and the city. I will note there is actually some evidence of what we're trying to achieve here. In the past 2 weeks, Mr. O'Hara, as the real estate broker involved, received a commitment from a commercial tenant to locate a headquarters office use in one of the 2 buildings that we're going to keep and rehab, and that is based on the plan to rehab the building and bring in the mixed uses and the amenities. So don't take our word for it. There's an actual recent example of what we're trying to achieve. So this application, the zoning regulation amendment to create what we call Adaptive Reuse Design District, AARD. Statement of uses, a list of the intended uses, design standards, and phases. And I'm going to go through this briefly, and then Mr. McDermott will give you more of the detail and the color and the standards. And then we have the preliminary development plan, which is, at this point, is only conceptual, but it shows the layout of all the uses, parking, phases, and amenities. The Adaptive Reuse Design District Regulation is at tab 2 of the May 15th package. And I want to point out that based on our consultations with staff earlier this year, we set this up as a subset of the Design Office 25 regulation. We decided it was not the best thing to do to create a brand new zone. So this regulation, in theory, only applies to the DO 25 properties in Milford, of which there are just 3 locations, 2 of which span Wheelers Farm Road. You know, it borrows from the DO 25 and preserves the best features of the DO 25, but it's not an entirely new regulation. It does incorporate as many, and this was a specific direction from staff, as many of the existing Milford regulations, zoning regulations, as we could accommodate, parking and signage being the 2 most prominent. And the ARD regulation lays out the process, the first stage of which is the regulation, the rezoning, the statement, and the planning development, the preliminary development plan as a coordinated package. So if approved, all of these are approved, and again, noting the preliminary nature of it, then the board will have established is the parameters for the applicant to proceed to the final development stage. And by the way, this whole structure is not something we thought up. This is really standard planning practice for any large redevelopment. You start with a conceptual master plan, it's sometimes called, and after that is approved, you move on to the detailed engineering and so forth. But what's really important for the board to understand tonight is that the first stage is preliminary. If you approve what we're presenting tonight, there will not be any permission to move dirt or construct buildings. The zoning board, and this is totally intentional, the zoning board will remain in control of this process even if you approve what we're presenting tonight. If approved, the next phase will be the final development plan, which will require detailed site plans, engineering, stormwater, utilities, will of course receive rigorous reviews by city staff and if necessary peer reviews, but the final development plan must conform to the regulation, the statement of uses, and the preliminary plan, and if it doesn't, we have to come back to you at stage 1, at square one, going back through the regulation process and the preliminary plan again. So again, the board remains in control. Quick review of the process. We met with city staff a year ago this week, and that resulted in our initial application in March of this year. We had a meeting in April with Mr. Sulkus, Mr. Griffith, and the mayor attended briefly, and his staff, and there was a specific request at that time that we incorporate affordable units among the residential units, and we did so, an increase in the density to incorporate that, but we did it without expanding the footprint of the proposed buildings, and we think that that came out very nicely, as you'll hear from Mr. Ploskin, our architect. So the revised application was filed May 15th with the affordability requirement in it. The Sewer Commission approved the development plan, preliminary plan in August of last year, and then revised it in April of 2024 to address the addition of the revision of the residential unit plan. But either of those Sewer Commission approvals, we pointed out, the redevelopment will require less sewer capacity than the fully utilized office building. The Wetlands Commission staff has confirmed no permit is required at this point because we are conceptual. The Regional Water Authority has provided a ability to serve letter. I mentioned community outreach. Mr. Corsi was here, talked to the Chamber of Commerce, the City Economic Development staff, Julie Nash, and also to the neighboring property owners. South Central Regional Council of Governments got a referral of the application. They expressed no concern. And DEEP, state level, got a referral also, and they said they were only concerned if some part of an AARD would be in a coastal area. This property is not in a coastal area. As to the affordable unit plan, this is, I think you understand at this point, this is not an 830G application. It's not a 30% set aside. There's no government subsidy. But the commitment that we have made in the regulation and the statement of uses and the affordability plan is that a commitment to 10% of the units at 80% of the area median income, which we understand to be consistent with what has been requested of other developments. So that within the development overall, there would be 52 units total. They would be dispersed throughout the various residential buildings, preserved for 40 years, qualifying income range of approximately $75,000 to $110,000, and a maximum monthly housing payment, rent including utilities, between $1,800 and $2,600 per month. And so that is the basics, and I'm now going to turn it over to, in order, Mr. McDermott, Mr. Ploskin, and Mr. Milone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Vincent McDermott. I'm a licensed landscape architect in Connecticut and elsewhere. I am also a certified planner by the American Institute of Certified Planners. And I've been around a while, as you can see. So, what you just heard from the lawyers, I'm going to try to make a little bit more exciting for you and walk you through the practical side of the regulation itself, and then we'll get into how the preliminary development plan. So the purpose, and I'm paraphrasing what's before you in the hard text, is really to enable the conversion of outmoded commercial office properties into really a vibrant community. This particular property was vibrant at one point. It's no longer. And where possible, because it's in the DO 25 district, to maintain offices where economically feasible, part of the mixed use, but also provide for residential use, which is not now permitted in your DO zone. It is limited, this regulation is limited to the DO 25 zone, and it would become part of a sub-district within that zone. But it's got to be based on a unified plan that ties the elements together. And as you'll see in our preliminary development plan and the architectural presentation that my colleagues will present, you'll see how we've done that. So part of the planning and design principles is to create a sense of community. That's why we need larger properties. We would as part of this, there are established design control that will be presented as part of the standards and uses to promote consistency and quality within the district. We'll repurpose existing buildings and create, part of this, the regulation, variety of housing forms and types for smaller households and active adult. That's part of your POCD, and so we're picking up on that. Can I have the next slide, please? So, in order to qualify before you, the ARDD must be 20 acres as a minimum. We're larger, but it must be 20 because this could be applied to other properties within other DO 25 districts should you approve this regulation. It must have 250 foot of frontage on a public street. And public water and sewer must be available. So those are some eligibility criteria for not only us, but going forward. Part of the process requires the submission and approval of statement of uses and standards. So we're must identify the uses within the proposed ARDD, may include residential as well as non-residential. The standards must consider area, bulk, location, and density, so you know what you're getting. Building style, height, materials and treatments, again, so you know how to measure the subsequent architectural plans as they come before you. And as Mr. Hollister identified, it must have the affordable housing provision at 10%. Now, the preliminary development plan will show the location of buildings and structures, both existing and proposed, has to show you the access, parking, and pedestrian circulation, the landscaping, the amenities that would be proposed, natural resource protection and open spaces, existing and proposed, conceptual level architecture, and we have to demonstrate the adequacy of the infrastructure. This is a two-step process, and we're here tonight for the first one. This is a legislative, when you're approving this, the first step is a legislative action by you. You have essentially unbridled discretion, I'm sorry to say, or hopefully you'll exercise it in our favor. And that is the approval of the ARDD district. That includes the zoning text, following the zoning text that you would normally have for any zone change, but it must include the statement of uses and standards and the preliminary development plan, which essentially become the regulation for the ARDD. So what is presented written, what is shown graphically, are the standards that you measure the final site plans by. Okay, that's a little different. The second step is really the administrative action by the commission, and that is when, if and when the ARDD becomes approved, as I said before, you're approving the standards and the concept plan. The final site plan must be consistent, entirely consistent with what is shown in the original approval. So that includes a site plan following your normal section 7.1 regulation. In addition, detailed architecture. The project, if presented to you at the time of the ARDD in phases, the site plans can come to you in phases. And as I said, it must be consistent with the statement of uses and standards. If there are significant changes, your decision, significant deviation from what you approve in stage one, it loops back. It doesn't go forward. You determine at the site plan, is this consistent with what we saw? And if it doesn't, they loop back to this phase where you have that legislative action available to you. If a site plan doesn't come before you in 1 year, you have the ability to revert back in this regulation. So it just isn't hanging out there for somebody else. If you don't get a site plan for at least the first phase and subsequent phases, within that first year, you have the ability to go back to the underlying zone. So that's a little different from what you've seen before. Okay. If you don't mind, go back to the aerial, because I want to start there. This is an unusual site bounded by the connector and the Wilbur Cross Parkway. And the buildings are shown here. And it really is an isolated section. You know, there are no neighbors on the parkway or on the connector. We have some neighbors to the north. We have some neighbors to the southeast. But we have a large property that has some very unique features other than the buildings. You can see in the dark blotch in the middle of the photograph, that's a large pond and a wetland area. You can see mature trees along the perimeter of the property that have been preserved as open space, but you can also see within the parking lots and around the buildings other mature vegetation. So the goal here is to fit our development within that. 47 acres, currently zoned DO25, as you know. This is sort of a standalone property, so we have an ability to create a new community. You were pointed out in this by Mr. Hollister. We have the 5 buildings. We have a parking garage, existing parking garage. We have access from Wheelers Farm Road. And right now there are about 1,720 parking spaces. Now, I can go to the proposed development. Thanks. So, this unique opportunity that we have is to is to convert outmoded 1980s style development into a productive asset for the city. The vision here is to create an active, exciting, mixed-use community, full service to support live, work, and play. We will have attractive amenities that I'll describe to you, both for the residents and for the community who may want to visit. We're going to maintain some of the existing buildings. We're going to preserve the mature trees and also restore the wetland as needed. So, as you're entering the site from Wheeler's Farm Road, you see what we have created as a boulevard. And that has two purposes. One, to create a well-landscaped community, but also to provide a means of exit in the event of one of those boulevards, sections of the boulevard, become blocked. You can also see the extensive landscape treatment in the various shade trees and the ornamentals that we're showing on the plan. So, as you continue on that road, do I have a pointer? Is there a... All right. I'll describe it verbally. As you continue down from the boulevard and enter the core of the site, you will notice that there is no parking on the road itself until you... And then that main road terminates at a green, a central green, typical of a community, just like you have here. Your green is central to the quality of Milford. This will have a central green. So up until you get to the green, the main access drive is free of parking. It is a park-like driveway. You will see on the right or the upper part of the driveway as you're driving in, two large structures. Those are the office buildings that will remain. And my colleague, architecture, will explain in greater detail what's going on with them. As you continue past the central green, you'll see the housing component, the residential component of our village. On the upper side, or the two L-shaped buildings, are multifamily surrounding a courtyard with a clubhouse and a pool. And the parking lot, and the parking will be along the perimeter of the building. So essentially, you'll come into the residence component. The parking will be to the perimeter of that group of buildings. And the amenities will be internal with landscaping on the outside of the structures, but there will be a facility and a clubhouse. The clubhouse would be for rental purposes as well as for other amenities. There will be 220 units in that phase of the project in the two structures. On the other side from that, you will see 4 buildings, and they are stepped into the slope. You'll note also that what's neat about this, again, we've pulled the parking away from the buildings along the perimeter, but internal, there are courtyards between each of the structures. Those are what we refer to as 3-4 splits in terms of height. There will be 144 dwelling units between the 4 buildings. The landscaped green is really what is great about this. We could have, traditionally you see these apartment buildings with parking all around them. We pulled it apart a little bit and made sure that there was some green space and made it attractive for the residents. The building that shows adjacent to the pond, next to the existing parking garage, that's for age-targeted residents, 5-story building, overlooking the central green on one side, overlooking the pond on the other. That building will be designed to have internal amenities for fitness and co-work space, club room, and so on. and the parking for that partially is in the existing parking garage. What's really neat about this from a community point of view, you will see a yellow line, a serpentine line that starts out at the entrance road, follows, yeah, there you go, following it around. That is a 1.25 mile walking path that will be pervious surfaces, but for all weather use. That loop trail links each of the buildings in the open space, and there will be connections between the buildings and the trail itself. From a design perspective, we'll be focusing on low impact development, preservation and restoration of the wetlands, preservation to the extent possible of the mature vegetation, introduction of rain gardens, and in terms of the landscape design palette, using native vegetation to the extent possible. As Mr. Hollister pointed out, 10% of the units will be affordable, evenly distributed by number and unit type throughout the community. So we're not loading up on one side and with market rate units, they would be evenly dispersed as they should be. So with that, I'm going to step aside for the moment, and then you're going to see some great architecture. Walter. And then I'll be back to talk about project phasing.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, members of the board. My name is Walter Ploskin. I'm a licensed architect in the state of Connecticut and 11 other states. I am a principal and partner in a firm called Niles Bolton Associates. As Mr. McDermott described, we're based in Atlanta. I manage our Virginia office. We practice nationally. We're currently working in more than 30 states, and next year we'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary. We focus primarily on multifamily housing and projects like this one, which is a master plan community with a varied type of housing units on it that promote diversity through the mix of uses, in this case residential, commercial office, and retail. Our firm has completed over 30 projects in the state of Connecticut in our history, so we know the state very well and what the market is looking for. So we're excited to share with you the vision of the project through the programming that would be as described as the statement of uses for the site. So the slide that you see on this, well, sorry, go back one slide. The slide that you see on the screen describes the first two buildings that Mr. McDermott highlighted, which are the two office buildings. Those two office buildings are consolidating all the commercial office uses that are on the site. But in addition to that, there's a commitment to reprogram or add program to those office buildings that would be more in line with what the market expects from commercial office today. And that's enhanced amenities that very closely mimic what you would see in a residential development. What you see on the screen is examples of intimate and communal gathering spaces, fitness and gaming sections, as well as retail, opportunity for retail, and in this case, a planned restaurant that would serve the business and the community throughout the day and be open to the community at night. Go to the next slide. With the residential component, what we're proposing is a very similar layered use of gathering space that complements the office. What we're looking for is an authentic mixed-use shared site throughout the day that, as Mr. McDermott described, relies on or enhances the preserved mature landscape and the perimeter buffer. But we do have this opportunity to create a new community that takes advantage of all the natural features of the site. You can see in some of these images very similar ideas on intimate and communal gathering spaces, both interior and exterior, as well as quality, timeless architecture that uses familiar materials and forms. The experience is it's formal and traditional, yet rooted in lifestyle living. The next few slides will walk through sort of the before and after of what the experience on the site is really like. So this first slide is the first building that you see as you approach the site. It's the office building closest to the entrance that's going to be preserved. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see the transformation there. So along the end of the boulevard as you come onto the site, we are improving the elevations, the facades of the office building by updating it to more contemporary materials and aesthetics. You can see in the foreground on the right, there's the programming for the planned restaurant space and an active seating courtyard in front of it. And with that, we're planning on adding hierarchical elements to the facade so that you understand the places of use throughout that building as not just a pure office building. You can see that we're planning on it being a very active space, a very welcoming space as you enter onto the site. The next slide walks past the second office building that's being preserved. And you can see off into the landscape in the background, there's a faint image of the existing office building, which would be sort of the horizontal line between the trees at the end of that boulevard. And the next slide shows your first close-up of what the residential buildings would look like. We would continue the facade renovations for the office building to the second building as well. And opposite that office building is where you see that park that Mr. McDermott described on the left-hand side of the image. The residential building in the background, you start to see the articulation of the style of architecture that we're looking for, which is very residential. The building is articulated both with materials and as well as volume and building form. The first building at the end of the boulevard that you see here has a little commercial frontage to it. So it would be just above and to the right of the white car. It looks a little bit different there because that's intended to be the welcome center for the residential property. That'll be where the leasing and the management takes place. You can see we've got varied roof lines, we've got hierarchy in the facade, and it frames the main amenity area as well. So just to the left of the taller portion of that building, you can see a little white cottage kind of nestled in between the building arms. And that's the main amenity building. We'll talk about that in a minute. The next slide shows a little bit more detail of the materials that we're planning for. Very traditional, familiar materials. We're planning on using some masonry, some siding, as well as asphalt shingles. Very standard materials that you see around all of your neighbors, as well as timeless materials that will create a sense of place and a sense of commonality between all the buildings and still allow them to be varied. The next image shows the same building facade as an orthogonal image and a typical floor plan as well as the standard ground floor plan. So you can see that we've planned out all the units in this building. We know they work and we know they have access to both the parking that surrounds it as well as the amenity space inside of it. These two buildings would account for 220 units in a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. And the placement of them really is to sort of start the residential component in a slightly more dense version. So we've got a 4 or 5 story building there, taking advantage of the grade as it falls down, but then concentrating the number of units around the amenity space. So it really establishes the purpose and the use of the site in the first residential phase. The next slide it shows a view looking back from those buildings that I just described back up through the field of existing parking that is terraced as you go up the hill. Along with preserving the mature trees along that way, we're proposing putting those 3-floor split buildings along the parking, taking advantage of the existing terraced elevation of those parking lots. So if we look at the next slide, you can see what's in the foreground. Immediately to the left is the buildings that I just described that are framing the main amenity clubhouse. And then this is looking back up the hill where you see on this side a 4-story building using very much the same architecture language that we described in the previous one. We've got varied forms and volumes that allow you to see balconies and shadow, varied roof lines that sort of break up the monotony of the buildings, as well as the traditional familiar materials that we're used to, all continuing this sort of minimal palette that is exuding a calmness that goes to this organization. The next slide shows the uphill side of that same building, which would be the 3-story version of that. So you see the scale of it starting to step down as the site goes up in elevation. And that's intentional to kind of keep the overall scale of the entire project similar to each other and complementing each other. So we think the architecture really does allow for that varied height using the same materials and the same color palette throughout. The next slide shows that same elevation in orthogonal as well as the typical building plans for that. These units are going to be a little bit bigger. They're a little bit more remote from the amenity space, so they will have access to outdoor space around them as described as the parkland. But because they're a little bit further away from the main amenity space, these units are thought to be a little bit bigger in size and a little bit more self-contained. The next slide shows the view from that terrace parking lot back towards the existing office building, but the real sort of home run to this image is the next slide where you see the clubhouse. The clubhouse is thought to be a traditional cottage that has been added onto over time, so it's very traditional and familiar in its appearance, but it allows you to have a lot of the varied amenity uses in it that we would be looking for. Those uses would include all the common gathering space for the residential community. It would have a club room, it would have a game room, lounge space, co-working for those that have a flexible work schedule, as well as a dedicated fitness center. And all of that would open up to the pool deck area that would be behind the building, kind of framed inside of the 2 L-shaped buildings, acting as a buffer from the highway to the rest of the units. The next slide shows that clubhouse in elevation, using the materials that we've been talking about, but in a slightly different way, kind of elevating the architecture where you want it to be around the main meeting spaces or the main community spaces, but still very, very residential, yet in a clubhouse kind of language. And then the next slide, so that's in an elevation. No plan there yet because it involves a much more detailed programming plan to get all those common uses into it. The next slide. So this is a slide from a bird's eye view looking above the first office building to the left that is planned to be demolished, looking back down over the rest of the office plans. The next slide will show you that essentially this is the view looking on top of the age-targeted building down at the community park space. So you can see how the community park space starts to organize all of the residential and commercial office uses around a common town square. The age-targeted building is, you see a glimpse of it in the left-hand side of the image. It's the tallest version of this architecture that we're proposing at still only 5 stories. Using all the same materials. The difference with the age-targeted building is that we anticipate a different kind of user for this kind of building. So this user might be a move down from a empty nester, or it might be working professionals that never had a family. So these units are planned to be more 1 and 2 bedrooms, but they start to include dens. So you have that at-home working space or that visitor space that when your family wants to come over and still have living space to kind of spread out to. The purpose of a building like this is so that you have consolidated living. You have your residential unit and you have your own dedicated amenities. So this building would have its own fitness center, its own club room, its own co-working space, all dedicated to this building, and this building would also have access to the greater residential communities as well as the access to the commercial office amenities. What else? The next slide shows that building in perspective elevation, again using similar materials, but like the clubhouse, because it's a little bit bigger building, we would use the materials in a slightly different way that highlight hierarchy. So this would have a porte cochere, a car drop off in the front of it that's covered, and sort of a highlighted central architecture, and a little bit more volumetric, but still keeping with the idea of varied roof lines and varied volume forms as well. The next slide would be it in elevation and the plans showing the lobby space, the club room, and the amenity space. The leg to the left of it that looks a little truncated, that's the side that hugs the existing parking structure. The club room would open up directly to the southeast view where the pond is, and that's where our pool deck and outdoor amenity space would be. And that describes all the uses through the architecture design. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Malone.
Thank you.
As you can well imagine, this is a significant project that will get built in phases. In fact, the first phase, and I'll walk you through the phases here. The first phase is interior renovations of the office buildings, because in order to keep the tenants that we now have, there will be some movement from one building to another before we can proceed with the balance. So the first phase is the renovation and repurposing of the existing buildings. The second phase, shown in the yellow, will be the entrance drive that I described earlier, all the way carrying through to the larger block of yellow coloring for the L-shaped buildings, multifamily buildings. Third phase, we move into the blue areas, and those buildings would be the multifamily as well. But in addition, at that point, we would then be able to construct the walking trail, that particular amenity, as well as the restoration of the inland wetland. The fourth phase, because of all the construction around it, would include the central green, the finishing of the central green, and then the final phase will be the age-targeted residences. You'll also notice in the color that we have, and my colleague John Malone will get into it in greater depth, we purposefully have distributed parking so that we're not top-heavy or under at any one time. So there's sufficient parking at each phase to support that particular phase of the development. So in a sense, it's standalone, but that was deliberate in the distribution of the overall parking system. That concludes my part of this thing, and John, my colleague, will talk to you about the engineering aspects, stormwater management, parking, and so on. So John? Let me clear up my space here.
Good evening. My name is John Milone. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Connecticut, and I'm a senior advisor at SLR Consulting. I'm going to take a fairly mundane part of this presentation, which will be fairly quick. But I did want to say one thing because it's important to me. I'm at the stage of my career where I kind of choose what I work on. I'm partially retired. This is one only of a handful of projects that I've selected to stay involved in. When the applicant came to us, said that they had this challenge here, it was exciting to me. And done a lot of work in Milford over the years, and a lot of people, and wanted to do something special here. So I've been involved since the beginning of this project, and I'm proud to be here tonight because I think we're trying to do something really worthwhile here. I did want to mention one thing before I get into this presentation. The applicant asked me to remind or to mention to you, and it's very important to them, that they've already started a lot of the renovations to the existing buildings that they intend to retain here on the assumption that they're wanting to invest in this project. They're not waiting for something to happen here. They're investing right now and continue to invest in this because they want this to be a successful project for themselves, of course, and for the city of Milford. So Vince and Walter told you a little about the vision. This is not a hard engineering project at this point, but we have to make sure that the infrastructure, the utility infrastructure and the roadway system can accommodate the project. And that's what I did, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about as this small portion of the presentation. Our intuition would tell us that, well, it's a heavily developed site already, so everything should be in place, but we don't take anything for granted, and we'll tell you what we found when we went through our analysis. So we can go to the slide that says traffic and access overview, and so I can read my notes. I'll switch glasses here. So the access to this site, as you already heard, it will connect to Wheelers Farm Road at the existing signal. It's opposite Southwick. This project, or this site, is very large already and it's considered a major traffic generator by the state of Connecticut. And it has a certificate as a major traffic generator dating back to 1984. So as part of this project, at some point, we will have to revise that approval with the state of Connecticut. We found that the traffic generation for the proposed use is very similar to the current office use. There are some differences, and I'll go through those with you in a few minutes, but there's a lot of similarities, so we don't anticipate any issues. The boulevard access drive that Vince mentioned is important because it will accommodate, it's a visual element, and we think it's important to the design, but it will accommodate emergency access, and that's important for this project, particularly to change of use. And we do anticipate there will be minor adjustments to the existing signal at the intersection with Wheelers Farm Road, and those will be implemented as part of a more detailed analysis. Next slide. One of the first things we did was look at the traffic generation from the existing office park and the traffic generation from the various uses proposed as part of the mixed use. And this chart lists the various uses that are proposed. The office use that will be retained, what we call the high turnover sit-down restaurant use that's proposed, the health club, the mid-rise multifamily residential of 1-bedroom units, the mid-rise multifamily of 2 or more bedroom units, and of course the active adult. And then we looked at that against the office park itself. And if you look at the very bottom of this, the two columns at the bottom, and you compare the totals, on a peak hour, a weekday, the traffic generation is very, very similar for the two uses. And that happens both in the AM peak hour and the PM peak hour. We think we'll actually be a little less. We will be generating, because this use isn't fully an office use, and there will be activity on the weekend, we're going to be generating more traffic on a Saturday than you would have on a weekday. But the signal is able to accommodate that traffic and is able to handle it. Next slide. So in terms of off-site, as I said before, we will need an OSTA approval, but we'll be looking for local approval first. So when we come back with a more detailed plan, we'll be coming back with a detailed traffic report, a full analysis, and analysis of the signal itself. We will anticipate doing some updates to the signalized driveway with Wheelers Farm Road, adjustment timings, maybe some signal equipment changes, possibly some geometric changes, but we don't anticipate those right now, but we won't know until we do the more detailed analysis. We looked at the off-site intersections that are nearby, and those have good capacity right now. They're operating at a decent level of service C or better. We know that because there's been recent traffic studies done by others that have analyzed those, and we've looked at those studies. And so we think there'll only be minor adjustments to timing at those. Next analysis. Vince talked to you a little bit about parking. We did a very, very detailed analysis of parking. So one of the things we always do is look at your underlying zoning regulations, and there are parking standards for every use within the underlying zoning regulations, as if they're independent on their own. And if you look at the bottom of this chart in the lower right-hand corner, that would generate a need for almost 1,800 spaces. It's a good-sized project, as you can see. We also looked at the Institute of Traffic Engineers parking requirements or analysis for the various uses, and their average parking requirement is significantly less, 931 spaces. What they call the 85th percentile parking rate, which is what you need about 85% of the time, about 1,200 spaces. And with a shared parking analysis, comes up to 1,136 spaces required. So we looked at that and said, we think the ITE is a little too aggressive for this development. We don't want to be that tight with the parking spaces. So we did our own shared analysis, and because we know that in a mixed-use development there will be shared parking, and without going through a lot of detail on this, we've taken a 15% reduction in required parking, and we propose about 1,524 spaces. Substantially more, hundreds of spaces more than what ITE would recommend, but slightly less than what we'd have if every use was independent on its own on this property, on generally separate properties. So we think that's a fairly conservative analysis. We think it's enough parking to support the development, but not so much that we have unnecessary paved surfaces, et cetera. Next thing we looked at was some of the utilities. Tim already alluded to this, but I'll mention it quickly. Water supply, there's a 12-inch water main on Wheelers Farm Road. We have a will-serve letter from the South Central Regional Water Authority. We'll have to do a fire flow test or a more detailed design to see if we have to boost the pressure at all for some of the units, but there's sufficient capacity to support the development. Next one. On sewer. Yes. I'm sorry?
First line, April, no, the sewer slide.
Yeah, okay.
April 2024. Go back to sewer.
Oh, you.
First one, April 25th.
Oh, yes, you're right. Okay. Tim was just mentioning there's a little error on this slide. So we did go in front of the Sewer Commission on 2 occasions. One when we first conceived the project, and second when we were modifying the project to add more affordable housing. And that was recently, in April of this year. So that shouldn't say September 25th, 2024. That should say April 2024 on the first line of this. But I will say, so what the Sewer Commission does is it gives you an allowable flow for all the properties within the city. On this site, the allowable flow that they've set aside for this particular property is about 70,000 gallons per day. Our proposed development will generate a flow of 66,000 gallons per day, which is below the allowable flow for this site, and they've approved that gallonage for this proposal. So we have the gallonage approved. That analysis was done by their consultant, Weston and Sampson, where they did an analysis. What's interesting about this site is there's, I won't go back to the site plan, but along the parkway, there's an old sewage treatment plant that was built on this property that supported this development before there were sewers in place. And that's been converted to a pump station, which now pumps the wastewater to the town's collection system. That'll be retained as a pump station under this development. But they want to make sure we have a maintenance agreement in place so that that's our responsibility in perpetuity. They don't want there to be any questions that we're responsible for the pump station on our site that currently exists. So that's as a final condition, we will have a maintenance agreement. And the last item I'll talk about is stormwater. There's an actual opportunity here. This project was designed and built years ago when there wasn't as much attention to water quality, stormwater management, and things like that. So you have old systems, connected systems, pipe connected to other pipe through catch basins and manholes that just has direct discharges. Now we try to interrupt that flow with stormwater management features, with natural features, et cetera, which we will incorporate as part of this development. But we will have a modest increase in impervious surface under this proposal of just under an acre. The site design will provide mitigation for all stormwater, peak rates of runoff and volume up to the 100-year, 24-hour storm that's required in your regulations, and we would do that under standard practice. The water quality volume, or that first flush of water that you hear about all the time, will be retained over the entire property. Per the DEP criteria for this property, because it would fall under the redevelopment criteria of over 40% impervious, 50% of that water quality volume will have to be retained. We don't have to retain 100% because it's a redevelopment site, but we have to retain 50%. We will look to do at least that and maybe more. But the end result, and that will be through a series of above-ground basins, rain gardens, underground chambers, and the like, but we'll separate this. The end result should be a significantly improved water quality situation after we are developed. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just to finish up, Tim Hollister for the record. Because this is a regulation and rezone, you need to think about consistency with the plan of conservation and development, which specifically does not mention adaptive reuse or mixed use, but it does talk about identifying where multifamily and mixed use can be located, and identifies where you can seek opportunities for affordable units. And so at least on that basis, we believe we are consistent with the POCD. Certainly there's nothing inconsistent between the POCD and what we're proposing. I think we can expect, I don't have quantification, but a local employment boost from a redevelopment of this size. Some residents will work on this site and creating what are known as live-work units, lower or eliminated miles driven, lower transportation costs. In discussions with staff, the issue came up about a public bus route. There's no public bus route, as I am aware, on Wheelers Farm Road, but with the Muse, Southwick, and this development, I think it would certainly be appropriate to ask the Milford Transit District to consider connecting this property to downtown and the train station. Last thing I would point out is that in the AARD regulation itself, sections 3.6.6.9 and .10 are criteria proposed for adoption of the proposed regulation and approval of the preliminary development plan. So we respectfully commend those to your attention and believe that we have, in this presentation, met all those criteria. So thank you for your patience.
Thank you. I would then open it up to the board for any questions. Mr. Sadi?
Thank you. Good evening, Attorney Hollister.
Good evening, Mr. Sadi.
First, I want to compliment you and the people that worked with you on getting this great amount of paperwork to us early.
Thank you.
And supplemented by the new materials received today. And I also want to comment on the fact that the vision that you're presenting to us has brought fruit to the mind of myself and probably the other board members.
Thank you.
And one of the things that I saw in the beginning of the presentation, you talked about there's only 3 areas in the city of Milford that are the DO 25. One is right across the street at Wheeler's Farm, and one is right down off of exit 35 in Bick. So the one on 35 in Bick, which is right off 95, I don't think is going to make the 20 acres if you knew.
That's correct.
Okay, so you're dealing with your property and the property across the road.
Correct. Which my client doesn't own and it does not.
I understand that.
Right.
But the point is, it's going to affect only really 2 properties.
You're correct.
Of the 47 acres that you've mentioned, or some other people have mentioned, how much of this is going to be completely developed, including the refurbishing of the existing buildings?
You're asking what is the percent, what's the coverage ratio?
Yeah, we know as we talked about all 47 acres going to be part of your project, or you just have presented the project, all the materials you're showing us is only the 20 acres you're thinking of.
Yeah. Vince, can you do that? I don't have that number off the top of my head.
Just do I understand the question correctly? What's a usable open space?
I think the question was, you talked about 47 acres. If we change it, it has to be a minimum of 20 acres. but it appears that 47 acres, most of the 47 acres is going to be used.
The usable open space on the property will be 53.5% will remain open. That is green space of some sort.
Correct, but the point is that the 47 acres is going to be the open space or buildings, but the point is your project as you present in the next step is going to include the whole property. It's not going to be taking pieces of it off.
I'm sorry, Mr. Sadi, we're not following your question.
Okay. We're looking to see about the change of the district, so we've limited to your particular property. You know, the next step, if we approve the change of the district, we're going to get to now the application. But what you're saying into is that when you get to the second step, and maybe the third step, you're going to be developing all the property either by refurbishing it, keeping it as open space, or adding new buildings. Is that understandable or no?
Yes.
Okay.
So the question is, when we move to the final development plan, what's your question about that stage?
Everything that we've seen now is going to be developed. You're not going to skip and not develop phase 2, not develop phase 3 unless you run out of money.
Go ahead.
The preliminary development plan that we presented here is the final product will have to look exactly like that. The buildings in their locations, the roads, parking, and the like. Taking that development plan to the next phase where you are approving site plan, each site plan, assuming that it's presented in phases, has to address that very specifically, and it will look, each phase will look as that development plan now is. So that development plan shows 53% open space, for example. You will have combined with when all said and done, 53% of the site will remain open. So there is no intermediate. The next plan will be a more refined construction document to allow that phase to be built. So there won't be any further development proposed under this application before you. We will not be able to go beyond that. There won't be, so each phase has to mirror the phases that we're showing here. More refined, more dimensions and so on, but ultimately what is presented here, and that's the beauty of this, you control this now, and then the next step is more ministerial in nature as you were approving a site plan. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. And you could stay up there, but probably better question for Attorney Hollister. Really like the idea of mixed use, but in the issue of mixed use, why are we not considering such things as restaurants and a little grocery store, things like that? You know, only the office space and only the residential.
So in this particular development, the owner will have a restaurant available in the refurbished office building. There was no intention to have, we're not trying to replicate, as other mixed-use projects, a downtown Milford. So there would be local amenities, such as restaurant, health club, for example, and the like. But no, there is no retail in the sense of competing elsewhere in town. It is not an Oxford Green, for example, up on Route 67 in Oxford. That's not the intent of this project.
And the last question that I have, probably to Attorney, this is going to go to Attorney Hollister, is you use the 10%, which I believe is a statutory requirement. Would you consider going up to 30%, 25 to 30%? I mean, my view is that we should have more affordable housing, and it looks like a great project.
Yes, well, Commissioner, the original plan, and believe it or not, this is Tim Hollister speaking. The original plan had no affordable units at all. We were requested to include 10%. That we looked at it, decided that that required an increase in density. If we go to 25 or 30%, that requires a greater density. We actually looked at a greater density and decided that the trade-off in terms of more impervious coverage or higher buildings or more parking was not worth it. Now, I will say the one discussion item was 10% at 80% of area median, and so we could perhaps manipulate that part of the standard, but to go up to 25 or 30%, could we do it? Yes. It's a completely different project. It's inconsistent with what the staff of the city asked us to do. My understanding is that 10% is the standard that is recommended in the POCD or has been used in some other recent developments, so we're comfortable with that. But I guess the best answer I can give you is where we ended up is, as Mr. Milone and Mr. McDermott explained to you, is a really nice mix of green space and corridors and perimeter parking. And it's a large development by any standard, but it's not overdeveloping the property. And I think the team would tell you we had several long discussions where we came to that conclusion. We looked at more, decided more was going to subtract from the development.
That's a great answer, and I appreciate that. And then the last question I have for you is more of a technical nature, but it's regulatory writing. We have the other district that could still be part of this. Would we not be more appropriate to place the 10% requirement of affordable housing and the regulation change from the DO-25 to the subset of the AARD? I didn't see it in there. I know you have an affordable housing plan, but regulatory wise, would it be more importantly to have it right in there to say that 10% will be required if we go to the AARD?
Right. An excellent question. What we looked at was putting the specific number in the AARD regulation, and we decided that, I hope I'm articulating this correctly, and Mr. Sulkus, if he were here, would correct me if I was wrong, but we wanted to put in the regulation the commitment to affordable units and then put the number and the percentage and the area versus statewide median in the statement of standards of uses. So it's a binding commitment on the applicant. As we've said to you several times, if we came back with something different, something less, you would have the right to say, no, that doesn't comply with the commitment you made in July of 2024. So we were holding ourselves to everything that we're representing tonight, but we didn't want to impose on the city essentially a regulation that you would become binding precedent for you in other developments that you may be considering in the future. That was the discussion we had with staff. If you, in your wisdom, have a better way to do it, we're all ears.
Well, thank you very much. We're a little bit tired tonight, so I'll think about this and tell you, but I really appreciate your presentation and the answers we're given. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments from the board at this time? Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So much of the presentation gives a great deal of thought to the programming involved of all the various phases. So my question regards one aspect of programming, and hopefully it's not considered premature. And that would be, I'm wondering about landscaping enhancements, something that enriches the overall complex, signage, and street furniture. What type of plans do you have for those items?
Okay, Commissioner Anderson, I believe those are all final site plan development, because at this point we're trying to show you where the buildings are going to be, where the roads, where the parking is going to be. But Mr. McDermott, Vince, do you? Vince,
have you held those discussions as yet?
Yeah, this is the landscape architect. I'll let him take that. And a good one.
We have not developed a detailed plant palette at this point, other than the commitment to use, to the extent possible, first preserve what's there. that we're not disturbing. So the mature trees, many of them are oaks and so on, are capable of being preserved. In terms of new material, we would be committed to using native species that are sustainable, drought resistant, and the like, as well as in the case of any restoration around the pond area, we would be using, again, native non-invasive species and make that commitment to you. We have not developed a detailed plant palette. Illustratively, the architectural images give you some flavor of the density or the extent of the plantings that we would be proposing, but we do not have that. That is a detail that would come forth, and you would be able to evaluate at the site planning level, at the approval of the site plan, the composition of the plants, the extent, sizes, and the like. But it is not part of the development proposal.
Agreed. Thank you very much for your response.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Hollister, for coming tonight. Just a couple quick questions. How long do you expect this project to go on? I guess you have 4 different phases. How long do you think this would take?
3 years? About 3 years to start to finish.
3 years. And the affordable housing component, would that come in early?
Comes in every phase as it's built. You get 10% in the first phase, 10% in the second phase, 10% in the third phase. 52 units total.
Okay. The other thing, you made a lot of allowances for ecological conservation, but I didn't hear anything about solar or EV charging. So I'm wondering what you had in plan for that, if anything.
Yeah, we had that discussion robustly as a team about energy efficiency, resiliency, green features. There'll certainly be a commitment to energy efficient appliances. Solar is obviously possible here because you have a lot of roof space and a lot of access to the sun, so that will certainly be part of the mix. EV chargers are becoming more standard, so all of those will be in the mix. And obviously this type of plan doesn't lend itself to showing you EV chargers, but they will be there, especially with the shared parking that creates more opportunities for where to locate them.
If I can add to that, Tim, the owner has already committed to putting solar on the office buildings.
Great. Good. Thank you. I think that's everything. Yeah. No automobile lifts in this plan?
You done? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Did I forget that?
So Attorney Hollister, good evening. How are you?
Yes, sir. How are you?
Good. I may have a question for you and maybe also for the landscape architect. So assuming all goes well, based on these plans, how many residential buildings will there be upon conclusion?
7.
7. And the amount of total units for residents will be 512, is that?
514.
514, okay, thank you. And approximately how many square feet of retail/office space will there be?
The 2 preserved office buildings are 160,000 square feet. Yes, Mr. O'Hara is shaking his head, yes. 160, and the retail space, I believe, would be 25 to 30,000 on the first floor.
Given market trends, as I think you explained in the early part of your presentation, do you anticipate near full capacity of your office space upon completion of this project?
Yes.
Do you believe that this project will attract commercial tenants to this space?
Yes, and that was one example I already gave you. We have a commitment at this point that's premised on doing the mixed use and the adaptive reuse. I frankly expect the way Mr. O'Hara, the commercial real estate broker, explained to me, is when we set up the program here, the vacancy in the office will be certainly less than 15%. That is a sustainable level. 65% is not. So,
I think that we heard earlier that the vacancy rate at this location is 70%. Is that about accurate?
Yeah, 30% occupied, 70% vacant.
Okay. And so your hope is to get it to somewhere about, maybe
less than
15, less than 15%.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I noticed there's a gatehouse at the front entrance.
Yes.
Well, all this, I'm a birder and a naturalist. I'm curious whether, once this is complete, the intention is for the trails, the pond, and so forth to be accessible to the general public, or just to residents and tenants of the office? And
This is envisioned as a regional destination. We want people who don't live here to come onto the property, shop, have dinner, go on the walking trails. There would be, and obviously you need to think about security and litter control and all those things, but we don't anticipate the walking trails will be residents only, no. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we open up? Go ahead.
Also, Attorney Hollister, did we cover streetlights at this property?
Not at this level of detail. I certainly think it would be dark sky compliant for starters, and down directed lights, 0-foot candles at the property line, and so forth. So.
Great. Yep. Go ahead. Good evening. I really appreciate where you guys are coming from. I know what the office market is an absolute disaster right now. We need to find alternate uses for these properties. My concern is, as of right now, the city faces a dramatic shortage of for-sale housing units. Young people trying to start families are not able to find starter homes. Their parents are unable to downsize out of their empty nester homes. Did you consider putting for-sale housing in this? Is that something you would be willing to consider?
I'm sorry, which kind of housing?
For-sale housing versus rentals.
Yeah. Yes, we did consider it, and any investor or developer worth his salt would always consider that. As you may know, in Connecticut and many other states, you can convert as of right from ownership to rental and vice versa. In my working lifetime, 42 years, I've been through several cycles where condos have been converted to rental and back. So the active adult building would be the candidate for sale units, the first candidate. So yes, that is a possibility. I think it depends on the market, it depends on interest rates, it depends on what else is available for people in the region. But yes, it was absolutely a consideration. And in fact, if I remember this correctly, when we met with the mayor, he specifically brought up that there is a lack of ownership housing in this region, and certainly if the demand is there, they would respond to that demand. Now, and the last thing I'll say is when we come back at the final development plan, I promise you we will give you a more detailed answer as to what we're proposing and why.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments before we open the public hearing? Seeing none, this is a public hearing. If anyone would like to come and speak to the issue, please come, state your name and address for the board. Try to keep your comments to about 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is June O'Connell, and I live at 102 East Rutland Road in Milford, which is right near the Wheelers Farms Road. Traffic up there is busy because that's the only street that cuts across to get to that other side of Milford. Whenever the post road is busy, everybody knows to go down East Rutland. And the problem with that is it's gotten really busy, and even more so when all of the many apartments that Attorney Hollister was very instrumental in getting at 440 Wheelers Farms Road under the 830G loophole, and traffic got much worse. He had an expert that told us the traffic would not be changed if this was to go through. It did. Now Southwick's, they have 121 apartments which haven't been rented yet, but they will be, and that's going to be even worse. So I'm asking you not to pass this zone change, or at least if it did get passed, what would happen is they'd go in and there'd be so many apartments in there, nobody could handle the traffic. So houses, you could only have so many cars to a house, and everybody loves retail and restaurants, and all the pretty pictures look great. But if there's all these apartments, it's just not feasible that the traffic's not going to be impacted. I mean, we used to get deer and all kinds of animals. I had a bear in my front yard. Not anymore. I saw a dead baby fox. You see everything dead because the cars are just killing them. And I'm just asking everyone to please don't pass it so that we could just, or do something that wouldn't impact the traffic, if that could be done. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, young lady, I live right off Wheeler Farm Road, Southwick, and right across, when I do all this.
And if you would just give us your name, sir, for the record.
Oh, Thomas Boone. And I'm sorry about that. So anyway, the traffic will be horrendous there. And also, they're going to think about the wildlife. I walk across that every day, and I see deer every day. So when they're building all this stuff, we're getting overcrowded now right next to Filanowski's. They got these big high-rise apartments, and 55 plus, and this is just going to add on to all the traffic. So it won't be, it's high density there with traffic. So that's all I got to say. And you're opening up a can of worms when you do make changes for like anything like that for the zoning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Michael O'Connell. I live at 102 East Rutland Road in Milford, which is about a quarter of a mile away from where this complex is going to be built, and maybe not. I have certain complaints. First of all, I totally advise the committee to deny the ADRR request by the developer. All right. We do not want to put the control of everything planning and zoning is designed to do in the hands of the developer. It just does not make sense. People elected you folks to protect them, and we could not and should not allow the developer to have total rule over what he wants to do on this property. My other complaint is that in recent years, there have been major developments in our area. We live on East Rutland Road, which is a single-lane road. The traffic is horrendous, all right? There is not, I'm going to assume there has not been a traffic study done on East Rutland Road to show how affected it is by these developments, all right? On any given day, there are going to be 12, 15 cars backed up trying to get off of East Rutland Road onto Wheeler's Farm Road. Between Lexington Green, Southwick, which they just built another 121 units, the Muse, which they built under affordable housing, which, by the way, this board denied and got overturned in Hartford. The traffic count is got to be unbelievably high, and it is not fair to the people who lived in this area their whole lives. Something needs to be done about it. I don't know what can be done about it, but something needs to be done. And last, this development is way too large, not so much for the acreage that's there, but for the density of the current population that's already around it. All right. These people purchased the property 3 years ago. They should have known at that time that they were never going to make this property work. The whole reason they bought this property is to do what they're doing right now. All right? But I urge you not to, number one, give them the ARDD. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Oh, come on up.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Janet Pagini. I'm here today representing Quadient. I'm Director of Real Estate Facilities for Quadient. We occupy and are the major tenant at the campus currently. We're in building 478, which is 84,000 square feet, and it is our corporate headquarters office today, and it also houses our main data center. So this is a very important facility for us. The plans are beautiful, but we just wanted to get some more information, so I'm here today representing and voicing some of those concerns. Our lease does not expire until September of '28, so hence we have 4+ years on our lease. The pending zone changes causes the following concerns. Because it is our corporate headquarters and we have this large data center, we must have continual electrical and data connectivity to our building during all the phases. It's critical and it's imperative to keep us running as a business. Our backup generator is in the other building that was going to be kept. So there's two buildings that are part of phase 1, 2 office buildings. We occupy one, our generator is in the other building. And I just want to make sure that, that stays running. It's critical that that's a backup support for our data center. The proposed plans, they're saying there's going to be 5 phases. It was nice to hear tonight that there's going to be some timing. I think you asked, there's going to be 3 years associated with the completion, but this is the first I'm hearing that. We haven't had a lot of communication from the ownership, and we just want to better understand the details, especially since our building is listed in phase 1. And of course, with any project like this, and we're a tenant, we've got 4+ years left, we just want to be concerned about our employees' safety with the modifications and our buildings being in phase 1. The front parking area and the surrounding roadways are all included in that phase, so we want to make sure that there's traffic safety and walking safety for our employees. And last but not least, we do have a lease. We have a quiet enjoyment clause, which allows us to peaceably and quietly enjoy the premises, which remains in effect throughout the term of our lease. Without any communication from the ownership regarding this zone change, this is the first, and the plans are beautiful, but this is the first that we're hearing all these details. I just want to make sure that it's going to impact Quadient in a positive way over our next 4 years of our lease. So that's our concerns right now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any further comments from the public?
Hi again. Valerie Smith, 372 Wheelers Farms Road. So I'm the property manager at Muse Milford, which this property would be kissing. My property is so very close. But I do like the push for additional affordable housing because my property already has 30%. So an apartment complex of that size should absolutely be able to accommodate more affordable housing. I mean, it's beautiful, but I also agree with the residents on East Rutherford Road who believe that it's going to be a lot of traffic. I already have 257 residents. I have 180 units, so an apartment complex of 514, over 1,000 units, 1,000 residents. It's going to be a lot of people. And for that throughway through Wheelers Farms Road, it's going to be such a busy, congested area. And with what's going across the street at Forest Hills, it's just going to be a lot. So while I know you guys have a lot to consider in general, I'm just thinking of those optics. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Any further comments from the public? Seeing none, the applicant has a little time to rebut.
Thank you. Regarding protection and accommodation of the existing tenants, the owners are here. They heard what, I didn't catch the lady's name, but certainly that conversation, I guarantee, will go on and existing tenants will be protected. I can only point out that this is a redevelopment. The traffic from this site has been declining for the last 10 years. So if there's additional traffic on East Rutland Road, it didn't come from here. And, the idea here is to restore it to something approaching the level that it was, but not to exceed it. And last thing I will say, I do not wish to get into an argument with the O'Connells, but I was on site a lot when the Muse was being built, and every environmental promise that was made to the city, to the board, you recall Dr. Clements was heavily involved. There's improved water quality, turtle protocols, improved habitat. The Muse was good for the environment, especially in that 12 acres downhill between the development and East Rutland Road. That's my personal experience. Thank you.
Thank you. The public will have the right to address anything Attorney Hollister just said. I would ask you not to go beyond that.
Okay, I'm only going to respond to what Attorney Hollister said about the traffic flow and the property that he's talking about. I never mentioned that property at all. I mentioned every property that's already around it is what affected it. And just so the board knows, the city of Milford, the Milford Police Department in 2015, when they finally approved, I think it's 440 Wheeler's Farm, I don't even know what to call it anymore, but they did a traffic study on East Rutland Road that never got into the record because they did it too late into the hearings, all right? The hearings were almost completed at that point, and it never got public. I would love for this board to get a hold of the Milford report from the Milford Police Department as to what they saw in 2015 of what the traffic flow was on East Rutland Road. I think you'd be amazed, and it is a critical problem, all right? My concern is not the developers. They made their bed, they can sleep in it, all right? My concern are the people that have lived in this area their whole lives. I've been on East Rutland Road for almost 50 years, all right? We used to walk down that road. There was hardly any traffic on the road. Now you cannot get out of your driveway in 10 or 15 minutes. Please keep that in your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that if anybody's come off 90, the turnpike to get onto the Merritt Parkway connector, the connector was my grandfather's property. It was taken from him for putting in a connector years ago. I'm on my mother's property, so I've been there since '76. And she and my grandparents were there for a long time. But if you ever get on there, you can see it's backed up to a standstill every single night, getting off to go onto the Merritt Parkway to come to Wheeler's Farms Road area. And it would only be worse. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything further from the applicant before we close the public hearing? Okay, without objection? We'll have, I guess we can have questions first before we close the public hearing if you wanted to address anything to the applicant.
Mr. Chair, this is actually through you to staff. I'm not sure if you have any staff report at all regarding these two issues.
Mr. Sulkus, it's my understanding, has worked quite a bit on this. I personally have not had any, I've had a little bit of opportunity to look at it. There was a lot of details that were brought up, and I think the applicant discussed it. On the basis, I think this is a very well thought out project. I think as far as the a redevelopment, it's exactly what one would hope for. The alternative would be to have a derelict area in the future that won't contribute much to the tax base, while this project. I'm surprised they didn't start throwing some numbers around, but it would have a tremendous increase in taxes. It's self-contained. Traffic is always a problem in this part of Connecticut. I mean, you know, if I looked at it, I'd probably play a little bit with some details, but I think it's a really good project for the city.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'd just like to say that I think, I hear the public and I hear what they're talking about in terms of the traffic and how it changes things that have been a certain way for a long time. And, you know, that's part of every community and every neighborhood. One fact is that if this was fully occupied as an office building, as it was 10 or 15 years ago, there was substantially more traffic because of that. And so this, as presented, will be less than the traffic than it was when it was fully occupied as an office building. So I think we already have what we have, and this is obviously better for the community. They've done the heavy lifting. Part of our long-term plan was to find ways to adaptive reuse, to use their term, on underperforming office properties. That's happening, like they said, all over the country. And it's going to continue happening. And this is a great, in my mind, excuse me, a great way to address that. So I'm in favor of it. And if anyone would like to speak, or we can just hear a motion. And Stephen, would we need two motions, or can we have one motion for both?
Two motions. First the regulation change, then the map change.
Thank you.
But first you have to close the public hearing. I don't think you've done that yet.
Okay, thank you for that. Without objection, the public hearing is closed. And Brian?
I'll make a motion to, I'll make a motion to approve, as presented, the petition of Timothy Hollister for a change to Milford zoning regulations, Article 3, Section 3.6.6, Adaptive Reuse Design District, to allow construction of a mixed-use development at map 096, lot 1915, parcel 12, of which Wheelers Farm Partners LLC and Greenview Equity LLC are the owners.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Sadie?
Thank you very much, Mr. Collegian. Thank you very much for the motion. I, however, would be asking that we consider as an amendment, and it's up to you, that instead of there being 10%, we have 15% affordable housing, and we place it in the original text change, which is the 6.3.1. Otherwise, I do agree that this is an appropriate way of trying to redesign and redevelop an area that has problems with it. But I think that we should have more than 10%. We did hear one of the more recent speakers that the Muse was, I think, 30%. I'm not asking to do that. In any event, that was my question. It's through you, Mr. Chair, to the proponent, if he wishes to change adopt my suggestion and make it 15% affordable.
Mr. Collegian, would you want to change your motion or no?
I don't want to change the motion.
Okay, and your second doesn't matter because the motion hasn't changed. Any further discussion on the motion? First.
Mr. Chairman, if we don't want to consider, if I want to consider Mr. Sadie's amendment and not consider the motion as presented by Mr. Collegian, how could I make my voice heard on that matter?
Vote against the motion. That's the only thing, and if the motion failed, you could make another motion. Any other comments or discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Agnesi?
Against the motion.
Mr. Allen?
With the motion.
Mr. Anderson?
With the motion.
Mr. Hirsch,
Against the motion.
Mr. Collegian,
I'm with the motion.
Mr. Machio,
With the motion.
Mr. Mortimer,
Against the motion.
Mr. Sadi,
Against the motion?
Mr. Zaharidis,
Against the motion.
Mr. Quish.
I'm with the motion.
You're tied, 5 and 5.
Motion fails. I would hear another motion. Mr. Sadi.
Thank you, Chairman Quish. This is in reference to proposed zoning changes under Amendment 24-3. I move to approve with the following condition that there be an affordable housing component of 15% in the adaptive reuse design district. It's based on a petition of Timothy Hollister Esquire for an establishment of an ARDD sub-district which will follow at 47488 Wheelers Farm Road, map 96, block 915, parcel 12, which Wheeler Farm LLC and Greenview Equities are the owners.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Yep.
Yes, I do have a concern. Is this legal under sheets? As some members of this board know, there was an email circulated by the town lawyer essentially saying what we are proposing to do, that is to mandate a specific level of affordable housing, may not be legal under the Supreme Court decision. Now, I for one would like to see get some additional information on this before we rush ahead into something like this.
Sheets applies to building permits. This is not a building permit issue. This is a zone change issue.
Any further comments? I don't really know how to do it. I'm not a lawyer, and I think we have to act with what's in front of us. If it comes down that there's another potential interpretation, it'll affect 830G and every city and every town. So I think it's beyond us to stop a development because of that personally. But
Does this affect their building, what they basically just proposed, like the whole layout?
I don't understand your question.
They just said that they can't build this exact layout that they just presented with more than 10%. So what we're going to be approving wouldn't even be this.
I think that's a very valid concern. If we approve this, they may walk from the project and not do anything. It's up to them. We would have a zone change.
Can they come up and say what would be affected with the 15?
Well, I think they already did, and the public hearing is closed. They already said.
Okay. All right. No, that's just.
No, good point, though. Good point.
They said they would increase the density to get to the higher percentage.
Then that would be an entirely new proposal. We have a proposal with a specific number of residential units. They would have to come back and reapply with 800 units, say, in order for them to get their business to pencil out. So we have a motion and a second to change the language to include 15%. Without further discussion, please call the roll.
Mr. Agnesi,
Against the motion.
Mr. Allen,
With the motion.
Mr. Anderson,
With the motion.
Mr. Hirsch,
With the motion.
Mr. Collegian,
With the motion.
Mr. Machio,
Against the motion.
Mr. Mortimer,
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi,
With the motion.
Mr. Zaharidis,
Against the motion.
Chairman Quish.
I'm against the motion.
Passes. 6-4 pass.
Passes, 6 votes required. Second order of business, do we have a motion?
Caught me off guard here. I move to approve as presented the petition of Timothy Hollister Esquire for establishment of an ARDD sub-district at 470, 488 Wheelers Farms Road at map 096, block 195, parcel 12, of which Wheelers Farms Partners LLC and Greenville Equities LLC are the owners.
Before I ask for a second, I'm just going to ask staff to confirm the vote.
The vote was 6-4 to approve the 15% affordable.
Okay. Do you have that, Sue?
If I may, through the chair, my question was, we had two votes. One, I believe the first vote, which was a 5-5, was for the regulation change 24-3, and the second vote that we took, I believed, was for the ARDD district.
No, it was another motion with the change. Okay. So now we do have a motion, and we looking for a second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Agnesi?
Against the motion.
Mr. Allen?
With the motion.
Mr. Anderson?
With the motion.
Mr. Hirsch?
With the motion.
Mr. Collegian?
With the motion.
Mr. Machio?
With the motion.
Mr. Mortimer?
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi?
With the motion.
Mr. Zaharidis?
Against the motion.
Chairman Quish?
I'm with the motion.
8-2 carries.
Motion passes. Old business, we have none tonight. Liaison report.
Very brief, we had a meeting of the South Central Regional Council of Governments Planning Board. We had no matters that involved the city of Milford, and we took up, I think, 7 matters.
There's no subcommittee report, and I'll have the approval of the minutes, so I'll hear a motion.
I move.
Second. Without objection, minutes are approved. Chair's report, I have none. Stephen, do you have a staff report?
No, I don't.
Okay. I'll go back to my chair's report. Just wish our city planner, David Solkis, a speedy recovery. And with that, we're adjourned.